Creator and Creation. In this instruction it is held that the cosmos is continuously undergoing the process of creative evolution, or progressive creation, a process without beginning, without interruption, without ending. This is the view accepted by the best scientific, philosophic, and theological thought of the present day, and of the best thought in these fields in the past, as well. Worlds appear, continue in existence for a time, then disappear, to be succeeded by other worlds composed of the same fundamental substance and energized by the same actuating power. Cosmic creation is conceived as constituting an infinite cycle of cycles. The creative spirit is eternal, the creative substance is eternal, the creative activity is eternal. This is the report of the best thought of all times, all lands, all peoples. Creation, the process of creation, results from the action and reaction, the coordination and correlation, of the positive creative principle, i.e., creative spirit, and the negative creative principle, i.e., creative material substance. Positive spirit plays upon negative matter, energizing it and stirring it into activity, working upon it and working it up into forms and conditions more and still more complex and intricate, through the creative process of change and becoming. Creation has its minor and major cycles, its tides, its ebb and flow, but the creative process as a whole is held to be continuous, constant, uninterrupted, endless, co-equal in eternity with the positive and negative principles which manifest it. But, you may ask us, where is God to be found in creation? Has he no place in the creative process? In answering this question, we are mindful of our promise not to invade the field of theology any more than is actually necessary. Theology is the science of God and of religion, which treats of the existence, character, attributes and works of God. Therefore, we prefer that you obtain your theology from the authorized sources and founts. We feel that there is nothing in the present instruction, however, to conflict with any sound, rational theological view. On the contrary, we believe that in this instruction such views will find an earnest and staunch support. This instruction is not designed, nor is it desired, to supplant theology or your own particular theological views. We see no difficulty in the reconciliation of our own teachings with those which you have received from the authorized theological founts. But, nevertheless, we feel that we would be leaving something unsaid were we to neglect to point out to you certain important implications of our teaching, although in doing so we may seem to be invading the realm of theological thought, at least to the extent of setting our foot over the borderline. Accordingly, we shall ask you to consider the following logical deductions from the premises previously set forth in the present instruction. First, we ask you to remember that all theological teachings inform you that God is spirit. If this be so, and you cannot conceive that God is matter, then God must be found in spirit, if he is to be found at all by you. But where should he be looked for in spirit? Let us answer you in the Hibernian, or Socratic, fashion, by asking you the question, where are you, yourself, found in that real essence of your being which you know to be spirit? You must answer, at the very center, core, or kernel of my spiritual being. Then we ask you, what does this self report that it is, when you ask it the question? Comes your answer, it says, first of all, I, then it says, I am, then it says, I am I, and, when pressed for its final answer, it says, I am that I am, and I understand that by that it means pure spirit. Then we ask, once more, what has the God you believe in answered, when asked who and what he was? You answer, he said merely, I am that I am. Then we say to you, you, yourself, have answered the question that you had asked of us, namely, the question, where is God to be found? Has he no place in the cosmos? He has a place in the cosmos, and you have found that place. That place is at the very center, core, or kernel of spirit. Your spirit is the microcosm, spirit is the macrocosm. Remember the ancient Hermetic axiom, as above, so below, as within, so without, as the great, so the small. God, by whatever name he may be called, or even when he is given no name, is the I am I, the self of spirit, and he says all that he can possibly say concerning his nature when he announces, "I am that I am." If, in spite of our desire to keep out of the field of theology, you still insist upon another answer, the answer to the question, is God personal or impersonal spirit? We feel justified in answering, if by impersonal, you mean a being infinitely transcending the limitations of finite personal existence as we know it, then we must say that, in our opinion, God is impersonal. But if by personal you mean a being possessed of the attribute of self-consciousness, and capable of the consciousness of, I am I, or I am that I am, then, in our opinion such a being properly may be regarded as personal. Further than this we shall not go in our statements concerning theology. Frankly, we feel that you should be able to work out the balance of the problem for yourself, aided by the theological teachings which are acceptable to both intellect or intuition, to completed reason, as we have defined it. An ancient Oriental teacher once said, "It is not enough that men believe in God, they must get God." We add, men get God through the medium of the something within themselves, the indwelling spirit. If God is the essential entity of spirit, and if the spirit within you is a focal point or center of expression of spirit, then God must be within your spirit just as he is within the spirit of the universe. And if he is there, within your spirit, surely you should be able to find him, and to get God, as the old sage said. We can but point the way, you must travel the road. Spirit, and that which is, the self of spirit, is not only infinity of being, in existence everywhere, but is also the indwelling spirit which abides within yourself, and which is the ultimate reality, or real self, of your individuality. In your contemplation of the infinity of outside existence, do not ignore the something within yourself. All is in the all, and the all is in all. You cannot escape beyond the realm of infinite spirit, but equally true is it that spirit cannot escape from existence within you. It is in you, as truly as you are in it. In this last statement is contained the essence of the great truth of the inner teachings of all philosophies and all religions. When you master this truth, you will know that which when known all is known. Strive to catch its spirit. Let us here ask you to read and consider the following significant, though somewhat whimsical lines of an unknown writer. Thou great eternal infinite, the great unbounded whole, whose body is the universe, whose spirit is its soul. If thou dost fill immensity, if thou art all in all, then I must be within thyself, or not be here at all. How could I live outside of thee, when thou fill earth and air? There surely is no place for me outside of everywhere. If thou art God, and thou dost fill infinity of space, then I'm in God, think as men will, or else I have no place. And if I have no place in thee, and if I am not there, where can I be, where could I dwell, and still not be somewhere? Then I must be a part of thee, no matter if I'm small. For if I'm not a part of God, there's no such God at all. The concept of indwelling deity is not a new one in philosophical and theological thought. Indeed, it is one of the oldest philosophical beliefs, and it appears very early in the theological thought of practically all religions. Technically, it is known as the doctrine of immanence, from the Latin term immanere, meaning remaining within. The Encyclopaedia Britannica, 11th edition, in its article upon immanence says, immanence, in philosophy and theology, is a term applied, in contradistinction to transcendence, to the fact or condition of being entirely within something. Its most important use is for the theological conception of God as existing in and throughout the created world, as opposed, for example, to deism, which conceives him as separate from and above the universe. It should be observed that the immanence doctrine need not preclude the belief in the transcendence of God, thus God may be regarded as above the world, transcendent, and at the same time as present in and pervading it, immanent. The conception of God as wholly external to man, a purely mechanical theory of the creation, is throughout Christendom regarded as false to the teaching of the New Testament, as also to Christian experience. The contrary view has gained ground in some quarters so far as to postulate a divine element in human beings, so definitely bridging over the gap between finite and infinite which was to some extent admitted by the bulk of early Christian teachers. The development of the immanence theory of God has coincided with the deeper recognition of the essentially spiritual nature of deity as contrasted with the older semi-pagan conception, found very largely in the Old Testament, of God as primarily a mighty ruler, obedience to whom is comparable with that of a subject to an absolute monarch. Modern philosophical, theological and metaphysical thought has inclined strongly toward the general doctrine of immanence, and the influence of this general idea is manifest in practically all recent discussion and writing upon the subject. Professor William James expresses this fact in the following statement contained in one of his works. Those of us who are sexagenarians have witnessed in our own persons one of those gradual mutations of intellectual climate, due to innumerable influences, that make the thought of a past generation seem as foreign to its successor as if it were the expression of a different race of men. The theological machinery that spoke so livingly to our ancestors, with its finite age of the world, its creation out of nothing, its judicial morality and eschatology, its relish for rewards and punishments, its treatment of God as an external contriver, an intelligent and moral governor, sounds as odd to most of us as if it were some outlandish savage religion. Our contemporary mind having once for all grasped the possibility of a more intimate Weltanschauung, the only opinion quite worthy of arresting our attention will fall within the general scope of what may roughly be called the pantheistic field of vision, the vision of God as the indwelling divine rather than the external creator, and of human life as part and parcel of that deep reality. Several years ago, a writer in one of the leading magazines presented a series of articles in which he set forth that which his investigations had revealed to be the dominant principles of the philosophical and theological teaching of our great universities. The following passage is quoted from one of the articles of the series. It correctly represents the modern tendency of thought along these lines. Now that man has discovered that there resides in his nature a spirit or energy that is divine, the colleges say that he can summon it to work his will. The potency and future operation of this spiritual force no man can compute. Science has found a way through psychology to God, the opportunities for the race, through invoking in the human consciousness the brooding spirit that fills all space, are absolutely infinite. Science, therefore, is demonstrating along new lines, or at least is claiming to demonstrate, that man is God made manifest. And modern philosophy, as set forth in American universities, holds this incarnation not as a fanciful and merely beautiful ideal, but as a working and understandable principle in the soul of humanity. The professors, therefore, who are digging what they believe to be the graves for dead dogmas, stand as exponents of the teaching that man is the embodiment and conscious expression of the force that guides all life and holds all matter in its course. Man has begun the cycle of that triumphal daring prophesied by ancient seers, and which appealed so potently to the imagination of Poe. Not merely in religious rhetoric, but in reality, the schoolmen say, is man the avatar of God. In this connection we also ask you to consider the following excerpts from the remarkable lecture on The Religion of the Future, delivered a few years ago by Professor Charles W. Eliot, former president of Harvard University, before the Harvard Summer School of Theology. The new thought of God will be its most characteristic element. This ideal will comprehend the Jewish Jehovah, the Christian Universal Father, the modern physicist's omnipresent and exhaustless energy, and the biological conception of a vital force. The infinite spirit pervades the universe, just as the spirit of a man pervades his body, and acts, consciously or unconsciously, in every atom of it. The 20th century will accept literally and implicitly St. Paul's statement, in him we live, and move, and have our being, and God is that vital atmosphere, or incessant inspiration. The new religion is therefore thoroughly monotheistic, its God being the one infinite force, but this one God is not withdrawn or removed, but indwelling and especially dwelling in every living creature. The scientific doctrine is that there is one omnipresent, eternal energy, informing and inspiring the whole creation at every instant of time, and throughout the infinite spaces. The doctrine of God's immanence is inconsistent with the conception that he set the universe a-going, and then withdrew, leaving the universe to be operated under physical laws, which were his vice-regents or substitutes. If God is thoroughly immanent in the entire creation, there can be no secondary causes in either the material or the spiritual universe. The contemplation of the concept of the indwelling spirit, the immanence of divinity, tends to bring the individual into the feeling and consciousness of his underlying unity with the ultimate source of being. He then realizes in his own consciousness the fact that, as the poet has expressed it, the all is one, and all are part, but not apart as they seem to be, and the blood of life has a single heart, pulsing through God, and Claude, and me. In the spirit of this new conception of the relation between the infinite spirit and the individual spirit, we ask you to consider carefully the following wonderful statement of Professor Josiah Royce, of Harvard, that eminent philosopher and teacher of philosophical truth. The infinite self, in the very least of the daily experiences, is known to you as something present. This is the deepest tragedy of our finitude, that continually he comes to his own, and his own receive him not, that he becomes flesh in every least incident of our lives, whilst we, gazing with wonder upon his world, search here and there for first causes, look for miracles, and beg him to show us the Father, since that alone will suffice us. No wonder that we remain agnostics. Hast thou been so long time with me, and yet hast not known me? Such is the eternal answer of the Logos to every doubting question. Seek him not as an outer hypothesis to explain experience. Seek him not anywhere yonder in the clouds. All experience contains him. He is the reality, the soul of it. If we have the true insight of the deeper idealism, we can turn from our chaos to him, who is our true and divine self, and can hear from him with absolute assurance this one word, O ye who despair, I grieve in you. Your sorrow is mine. No pang of your finitude but is mine too. I suffer it all, for all things are mine, I bear it, and yet I triumph. This word of the self, I say, we can be sure of, for it is the one final word of our whole philosophic thought. Some philosophers hold that the creative power is wholly and completely involved in its creation. Others hold that only a part or portion of the creative power is involved in its creation. Some of the Oriental schools, in fact, hold that only an infinitesimal portion of the infinite being is involved in or concerned with the manifestation of creation. Again, some schools hold that the creative spirit enters into and pervades the material substance as salt enters into and pervades the water of the ocean. Others hold that the action of the creative spirit upon the material substance is akin to that of the magnet upon a mass of steel filings, i.e., by induction, the magnetic emanation being held to, in soul, the tiny particles of steel, causing them to take form and manifest motion, just as spirit so ensouls the material substance with similar results. Others employ the symbol of the sun of spirit shining upon the surface of the great ocean of material substance, and being reflected from its face. The sun is regarded as penetrating the ocean by means of its emanated rays, being reflected from any point of its surface, and causing motion and surface manifestations of form in the superficial portion of the great body of water. In this view, it is held that the sun of spirit, in itself, never actually enters into the material substance, merely its emanated rays enter into the latter, there working upon and working up the material stuff, thus creating forms and activities, and manifesting the process of becoming. Carrying still further this symbolic illustration of the sun and the ocean, it is shown that the sun continually causes portions of the water of the ocean to rise upward in the form of vapor. This vapor, condensing, then falls upon the ocean in the form of rain or dew. Here attention is called to the fact that in every falling raindrop, or dewdrop, as in the ocean itself, there is ever reflected the image and form of the sun. Each drop has its sun, its light, its radiance. Each drop is as a miniature ocean, in this respect. The sun's reflection appears in the great ocean, and in every tiny raindrop or dewdrop, yet the sun itself ever remains over and above all, though its emanations are ever in all. Thus by the symbol of sun and ocean is explained the nature of the presence power of spirit in the material substance. Thus is illustrated the transcendence and the immanence of the creative presence power. It is a wonderfully effective symbolic illustration, one worthy of respect, whether or not it is accepted as properly and fully representing the truth. You will find that it will grow upon you as you consider it, it will stick in your mind like the burrs in the wool of the sheep. The sun has always been a favorite symbol for the supreme power or the supreme being. It seems to appeal powerfully to the religious emotional nature, the poetic imagination, and the philosophical intuition of man. Perhaps intuition recognizes it as the most appropriate and most fitting symbol of a truth that can be expressed only by means of symbols. Just as the mind of man has ever speculated concerning the how of creation, so has it sought earnestly for an explanation of the why of creation. In all developed philosophic, metaphysical, and theological thought there is found at least an attempt to answer the question, why did the supreme power create the universe? In some cases there is found the attempt to dismiss the subject as part of the great mystery, something beyond the knowledge or thought of man, but even in such cases there is usually found an attempt at some kind of explanation. Many of these so-called explanations are so crudely anthropomorphic, so evidently the naive answers of childlike minds, that they require no serious philosophical consideration or discussion. Those who originated them certainly lacked the philosophic imagination. Of these would-be explanations, some merely offend the intelligence of the thinker, as, for instance, the statement that he desired to be worshipped and glorified, and so he created beings to worship him and sing his praises. Others offend the heart of man, as well as his intellect, as, for instance, the idea that the cosmos is merely an amusement-affording moving picture show, operated by God in order to serve as the pastime of eternity, or, again, the idea that life is but a great game played by God, with his creatures as the pieces, or as the ball, a game played by him for the purpose of exhibiting his own infinite power, or, perhaps, for the purpose of defeating an imagined bogey. Intuition revolts at such ideas. It knows that there must be an infinite rational meaning attached to the infinite manifestation of the infinite presence power. Nothing less than this will satisfy the needs of intuition. Far more satisfying to both intellect and intuition is the interpretation furnished by that general philosophical school known as vitalism. Vitalism, under several names, is well represented in the history of philosophical thought, ancient and modern. Bergson is one of its more prominent modern advocates. Its spirit is expressed in a somewhat unpleasant form by Schopenhauer and his followers. It is also found implicit in the basic teachings of ancient Buddhism. This broad philosophic trend of thought known as vitalism may be indicated by the following general statement of its basic conception, viz. Spirit has its most essential and active attribute in life or livingness. The life principle of the universe, which is spirit in one of its aspects, being essentially and characteristically livingness, naturally finds its normal expression in the activities of life, through the multitudinous forms of life which it has created for the purpose of such expression. The expression and manifestation of life and livingness constitute the legitimate and natural activity of its essential nature and character. Accordingly, the life principle, which is an aspect of spirit, eternally creates the infinite series of universes in order to manifest and express in objective form that essential livingness which is within itself as the innermost core, kernel and heart of itself. It creates in order that it may live, i.e., express its livingness in objective form. In order to do this, it works upon and works up the universal material substance, in order to produce material forms to be animated, energized, and inspired by its living spiritual energy. It creates bodies of material substance in order to breathe into them the breath of the spirit of life and thereafter to live and act in and through them. Bergson's basic concept may be stated as follows: a free and spontaneous life is the very essence of the real. Pushing out from within, seeking expression, life buds and breaks forth into original creation. The laws of nature are life's habits, its ways of proceeding and doing things. Reality is pure creative life, life fed from within rather than from without. It evolves and creates by means of its own inherent and spontaneous creative power. Life is not static, not something that was once something different, not a past left behind, and a future spread out in front. It is a single, continuous movement, carrying all its past with it and pressing forward into a future which it is forever creating. Evolution is the original impetus of life, the living act in progress. This general conception of the presence and activity of a will to live in nature is found to pervade many and varied forms of philosophical thought. It exerts a peculiar fascination upon the philosophic mind. The philosopher once falling under its influence rarely ever entirely escapes from it thereafter. The conception is supported by the observable facts concerning the evident presence in nature of an active principle, energy or force which manifests the characteristics attributed to this hypothetical will to live. There undoubtedly is a conative energy working in and through nature, which has as its evident end and purpose the manifestation, expression, perpetuation and continuance of life, of living forms. In fact, the very idea of nature implicitly involves the notion of this element which constantly inspires the natural processes. The instinct of self-preservation, and that of the perpetuation of the species, constitute two of nature's strongest and most active forces. In them, the will to live shows itself most plainly. The will to live is found ever at work, striving, endeavoring, seeking and attempting to manifest and express itself in objective actuality in livingness. Its presence is plainly discernible in the germinating seed and the growing plant, in the developing germ, embryo, and young of animal life, in the adaptation of the living creature to its environment, and in its differentiations designed to meet the requirements of changing environments, in the provision for the sustenance, support and survival of the living creature, and the arrangements for the perpetuation of life and livingness in the offspring. When you think and speak of nature's processes concerned with living creatures, you are thinking of the manifestation and expression of this will to live, which is one of the aspects of spirit. Schopenhauer was so impressed with this idea of the will to live, and found so many evidences of its presence and activities on all sides in nature, that he felt warranted in postulating it as the most essential element and factor of the world spirit, which he regarded as being the creative agent of the universe. Indeed, he went so far as to apply to this creative spirit, itself, the name of the will to live. The Buddhists, likewise, regard it as the actuating energy of the universe, holding that it, the will to live, is the creator, the preserver, the destroyer of the universe. They also regard all forms of desire or will as forms, phases, or modes of the activity of this universal will to live. Others, in the same spirit, regard the universal actuating energy or creative spirit as power with the desire to act, or desire with the power to act, the chief end, aim, purpose, and intention of such action being to manifest livingness. In this consideration of the creative spirit as life, however, you must not lose sight of the fact that, wherever there is life there is mind, wherever there is mind there is life. Life and mind are attributes of spirit, life being the more fundamental, mind being a form of the expression of life. If the universe is instinct with life, then mind must be involved in its every part. And so it is, as all careful thinkers sooner or later discover. That mind is present in the creative processes of the material universe, has ever been evident to thinking, reflective minds. The presence of law, order and system is an inevitable, invariable, and infallible indication of the presence power of living mind. Law, order and system are apparent in nature, on every hand. Strive as we may, we cannot escape from this conviction. Moreover, in the cosmic processes there is to be found an invariable logical sequence of cause and effect, a pure logic knowing no exceptions, variations, or contradictions. This being present, that becomes, this being active, that results, is the rule of the cosmic logic. A reverent scientist once said that science is but a reading by the human mind of the thoughts of the infinite mind. A famous astronomer once said that his work consisted merely of thinking God's thoughts after him. There must be mentation involved in nature's processes, else the human mind could not read logical process in them. Science is based upon the presence and result of this logic of nature. Logic, however, is impossible and inconceivable without the premise of a logical mind, and mind is impossible and inconceivable without the premise of life. Nature, being what it is, must be the manifestation of living mind. And so, then, we have discovered that the cosmos, the universe, the world in which we live and move and have our being, is the creative activity of an infinite and eternal living spirit, from which all things flow and proceed, and of which all things are forms of manifestation and expression. You, the individual who is reading these lines, you are a focal point or center of the manifestation of life, mind, will, in that world of manifestation and expression. You are the microcosm, corresponding in nature and essence with the macrocosm of which you are the focal point of expression. You partake of its nature and being, you are like unto it in spirit, you are made in its spiritual image. Like it, you possess the creative spirit, and you are manifesting, to a greater or less extent, the activities of creation in your everyday life. The individual spirit, which is you, is constantly at work manifesting its creative power, playing upon material substance, working upon and working up this plastic medium by the power of your will. You have been doing this work chiefly unconsciously, instinctively, unaware of the source of your power, uninformed as to the methods of effectively employing this great creative power within you. You will see at once that if you can but open up a more direct channel of communication with the infinite fount of power, then you may partake of a greater share of that creative power. The spiritual creative power is available to you. You may secure its services and employ them in the tasks and work of your everyday life, and toward the attainment of your ideals. You, the individual creative spirit, are entitled by your birthright to claim and demand the aid and assistance of the infinite and eternal spirit in which you live and move and have your being, and from which your life and power proceed and flow. You have the natural and inalienable right to draw upon the infinite fount of creative power, and to apply that power through your own creative channels. Let us carry this thought with us into our study of the next section of this book. Unison with Infinity. The esoteric or inner teachings of many schools of ancient and modern mysticism and occultism, of Oriental and Occidental lands, under many names and guises, have inevitably, invariably, and infallibly pointed to a supreme end to be gained by the student of the inner doctrine or ancient wisdom of the sages. That supreme end may be called unison with infinity, or conscious contact and attunement with the infinite spiritual principle of life, consciousness, power. The essential spirit and essence of this inner teaching is expressed in the statement of the message of truth, as announced in one form or another by the great spiritual giants and illumined teachers of the past and the present, of all lands and peoples, of all great religions. To the message of truth the truly wise listen, they commit it to memory, and make it the essential and basic fact of their mental and spiritual life. Hearken ye to it. Ponder over it. Analyze it. Dissect it. Subject it to mental mastication, mental rumination, mental digestion, mental assimilation. Return to it again and again, you make it your very own. The message of truth. You, yourself, in your essential and real being, nature and entity, are spirit and naught but spirit, in and of spirit, spiritual and not material. Matter, in any and all of its forms, is your instrument of expression, the stuff created for your use and service in your expression of life, mind and will. It is your servant, not your master, you condition, limit and form it, not at you, you fashion it, not at you, when you recognize and realize your true and real nature, and awaken to a perception of your real relation to spirit and of its relation to you. The report of spirit, received by its accredited individual centers of expression, and by them transmitted to you, is this: in the degree that you perceive, recognize and realize your essential identity with me, the supreme presence power, the ultimate reality, in that degree will you receive and be able to manifest my spiritual power. I am over and above you, under and beneath you, I surround you on all sides, I am also within you, and you are in me, from me you proceed, and in me you live, and move and have your being. Seek me by looking within your own being, and likewise by looking for me in infinity, for I abide both within and without your being. If, and when, you will adopt and live according to this truth, then will you be able to manifest that truth. In and by it alone are freedom and invincibility, and true and real presence and power to be found, perceived, realized and manifested. The message of truth informs you that you must perceive, recognize and realize your essential identity with the infinite presence power, in order to be able to manifest that spiritual power. This perception, recognition, realization is experienced in completed reason, i.e., by combined and coordinated intellect and intuition. In the foregoing instruction we have sought to awaken the intellectual perception, recognition and realization. We trust that we have succeeded in doing so. The intuitional perception, recognition and realization differ from the intellectual achievement, inasmuch as intuition does not need to be taught, it already knows. All that is required here is to awaken in intuition the fact of its own knowing, so that it may pass down to the field of intellect its report. This awakening may be effected in two ways, viz. 1. By considering the reports of the experience of those illumined souls who have preceded you on the path of attainment, and who have left behind them a record of their spiritual experiences. 2. By cultivating the actual spiritual contact between your individual spirit and the universal spirit, thus coming into actual unison and attunement with the latter. The contemplation and sympathetic reception of the reports of the great spiritual leaders of the race, those illumined souls who have reached the mountaintop of spiritual wisdom and spiritual consciousness, will serve to set up in your soul a degree and quality of spiritual vibration which will be sufficient to induce a responsive unison and attunement with the infinite spiritual principle, the infinite Oversoul. In reading the words of such reports you will often actually catch the spirit of their writers, and enter the same plane of spiritual consciousness upon which their writers dwelt at the time of their writing, and from which their messages were delivered. For this reason we ask you to consider the following quotations from The Oversoul, that remarkable essay of Emerson. It is written from one of the highest planes of spiritual consciousness, and its words and lines are saturated with the highest quality of spiritual vibrations. It is practically certain to awaken a responsive note in the soul that comes in sympathetic contact with it. Here follow the quotations. The heart which abandons itself to the Supreme Mind finds itself related to all its works, and will travel a royal road to particular knowledge and powers. For in ascending to this primary and aboriginal sentiment we have come from our remote station on the circumference instantaneously to the center of the world where we see causes, and anticipate the universe, which is but a slow effect. This communication is an influx of the Divine Mind into our mind. It is an ebb of the individual rivulet before the flowing surges of the sea of life. Every distinct apprehension of this central commandment agitates men with awe and delight. A thrill passes through all men at the reception of a new truth, or at the performance of a great action which comes out of the heart of nature. In these communications the power to see is not separated from the will to do, but the insight proceeds from obedience, and the obedience proceeds from a joyful perception. Every moment when the individual feels himself invaded by it, is memorable. Always, I believe, by the necessity of our constitution, a certain enthusiasm attends the individual consciousness of the Divine Presence. The character and duration of this enthusiasm varies with the state of the individual. There are varying forms of that shudder or awe and delight with which the individual soul always mingles with the universal soul. The nature of these revelations is always the same, they are perceptions of the absolute law. They are solutions of the soul's own questions. They do not answer the questions which the understanding asks. The soul answers never by words, but by the thing itself that is inquired after. Behold, it saith, I am born into the great, the universal mind. I, the imperfect, adore my own perfect. I am somehow receptive to the great soul, and thereby do I overlook the sun and the stars and feel them to be but the fair accidents and effects which change and pass. More and more the surges of everlasting nature enter into me, and I become public and human in my regards and actions. So I come to live in thoughts, and to act with energies which are immortal. Does this idea of drawing to yourself the inspiration and illumination of the infinite spirit seem presumptuous, irreverent, forbidden to your will? If so, turn to your own favored book of religious authority, whatever it may be, Jewish, Christian, Mohammedan, Brahmin, Buddhist, Zoroastrian, it matters not which, for each and all of them carry the message of truth in some form, and you will find there the invitation to ask, and the promise to furnish, the intuitional, inspirational, and illuminating messages of truth, of help, strength, aid, and comfort, in the hours of need. For instance, if any man need wisdom, let him ask of God. Also, before they call, I will answer, and while I am speaking they will hear. Also, ask and ye shall receive, and knock and it shall be opened unto you. The invitation always is there, the promise of fulfillment always accompanies it. Next, we offer for your sympathetic consideration the following quotations from a little esoteric manual, highly esteemed by many, and which some believe to have been inspired by high spiritual authority. The manual is known as Light on the Path, and its words were written down by Mabel Collins. Its quality speaks for itself in the following lines culled from its great wealth of the inner teachings. Seek it, the truth, by plunging into the mysterious and glorious depths of your own inmost being. Seek it by testing all experience, by utilizing the senses, in order to understand the growth and meaning of individuality, and the beauty and obscurity of those other divine fragments which are struggling side by side with you, and form the race to which you belong. Seek it, the truth, by the study of the laws of being, the laws of nature, the laws of the supernatural, and seek it by making the profound obeisance of the soul to the dim star that burns within. Steadily, as you watch and worship, its light will grow stronger. Then you will know that you have found the beginning of the way. And, when you have found the end, its light will suddenly become the infinite light. To have seen thy soul in its bloom, is to have obtained a momentary glimpse in thyself of the transfiguration which shall eventually make thee more than man. To recognize, is to achieve the great task of gazing into the blazing light without dropping the eyes, and not falling back in terror as before some ghastly phantom. This happens to some, and so, when the victory is all but won, it is lost. Then will come a calm, such as comes in a tropical country after a heavy rain, when nature works so swiftly that one may see her action. Such a calm will come to the harassed spirit. And, in the deep silence, the mysterious event will occur which will prove that the way has been found. Again and again the battle must be fought and won. It is only for an interval that nature can be still. But to learn is impossible until the first great battle has been won. The mind may recognize truth, but the spirit cannot receive it. Once having passed through the storm, and attained its peace, it is then always possible to learn, even though the disciple waver, hesitate, and turn aside. The voice of the silence remains within him, and though he leave the path utterly, yet it will resound, and rend him asunder, and separate his passions from his divine possibilities. Then, with pain and desperate cries from the deserted lower self, he will return. Only fragments of the great song come to your ears while you are but man. But listen to it, remember it faithfully, so that none which has reached you is lost, and endeavor to learn from it the mystery which surrounds you. In time you will need no teacher. For as the individual has voice, so has that in which the individual exists. Life itself has speech and is never silent. And its utterance is not, as you that are deaf may suppose, a cry, it is a song. Listen to the song of life. Store in your memory the melody you hear. Learn from it the lesson of harmony. Look for it, and listen to it, first in your own heart. At first you may say that it is not there. When I search I find only discord. Look deeper. If again you are disappointed, pause, and look deeper again. There is a natural melody, an obscure fount, in every heart. It may be hidden over and utterly concealed and silenced, but it is there. At the very base of your nature, you will find faith, hope, and love. Look for it there. We shall not attempt to explain or to comment upon the inspired statements above presented to you. They will become more and more apparent to you as you ponder over them. The study of and meditation over them will open your spiritual ears, and make keen your spiritual hearing. Enough to say that the song, the hidden melody, is the song of the soul, the harmonious voice of the spirit within, which speaks without words. It is the voice of the silence which chants, I dwelleth within thee, just as thou dwellest within me, the kingdom of heaven is within thee, just as thou art in the kingdom of heaven of spirit, of that which I am. Spirit abides within its creation, within you, just as you are present in your thoughts, your ideas, your will actions, and your life processes. It wells up in your spiritual consciousness, and when your ears are properly attuned to its high vibrations, you will catch occasional notes of its great song of infinite life. Blessed is he who is able to so still the sounds of the phenomenal world that his ears may receive the notes of the voice of the silence, to catch the rhythms of the soundless sound of the infinite harmony. By cultivating actual spiritual contact between your individual spirit and the universal spirit, you act as does the person who steps out into the open places and allows the rays of the sun to fall upon him. Like a great sun of spiritual power, spirit is present above you, radiating its beams of presence power upon you. When you recognize and realize its presence, and open the channels of your being to the inflow of its beneficent forces, then it energizes, animates, and inspires your entire being. As you have seen in the message of truth, the available strength of these rays and beams, and the degree of your receptivity to them, depend upon your degree of perception, recognition, and realization of the presence power of the Sun of Spirit. That sun is always there, radiating its power upon all alike, but unless the individual opens himself to its influence he will not receive it. Inasmuch as spirit is infinite life, infinite mind, infinite will, its radiations partake of the presence and power of each of these three aspects of itself. These rays, received into your being, will give you more and more efficient life, more and more efficient mentality, more and more efficient will. All life power, all mind power, all will power flow from this original source, and you may receive a greater and fuller store of each and all these phases and forms of spiritual power if you will but follow the spirit of the message of truth which has been announced to you. As a writer has said, as one comes into and lives continually in the full, conscious relation of his oneness with the infinite life and power, then all else follows. This it is that brings the realization of such splendors, and beauties and joys, as a life that is thus related with the infinite power alone can know. This it is to come into the realization of heaven's richest treasures while walking the earth. This it is to bring heaven down to earth, or rather to bring earth up to heaven. This it is to exchange weakness and impotence for strength, to exchange sorrows and sighings for joy, to exchange fears and forebodings for faith, to exchange longings for realizations. This it is to come into fullness of peace, power, and plenty. The inner teachings of all great religions contain references to a silent place of the soul in which the individual spirit communes with the infinite spirit of life. Many are the references to the inner chamber, the door to which will be opened to him who gives the right knock. Many are the admonitions to enter into thine inner chamber and shut the door. This inner chamber is not the physical place which so many have considered it to be. It is the quiet place of the soul, the sanctuary of the spirit, the state of spiritual consciousness. There is a mental state in which you may still the waters of the ocean of life so that the image of the infinite sun may be clearly and distinctly reflected in its bosom. This state is called the silence. It is the quiet place of the soul, the value of which is taught by the mystics. It is the silence in the midst of the storm of life. There the winds of the senses, and the waves of the passions are stilled, and the waters of the mind cease their troubled movement, their whirlings and their swirlings, and permit the bosom of the ocean to rest quiet and still, allowing the great sun of spirit to picture itself on its placid surface. In that state of quiet and peace the soundless sound is heard, the voice of the silence breathes words of comfort and encouragement, of courage and strength, to the tired soul. In that silence man communes with the great flame of spirit from which has emerged the divine spark within himself. From it he emerges refreshed and strengthened, comforted and contented, better able to meet the requirements of duty, work, and service in the outside world, the world in which the storms of change and becoming rage. In the heart of the storm, in the quiet place of the soul, in the silence of the spirit, there reign peace and power, wisdom and will, life and livingness, the quintessence of the presence power of spirit. He who is wise will seek, find, and avail himself of the peace and strength of the silence. The spirit of the silence is breathed in the old hymn written by Martineau over 75 years ago, the hymn entitled The Secret Place. Its words have brought comfort and peace to thousands of weary souls seeking strength, life and wisdom. Here are the words of the first verse of that hymn. He who himself and God would know, into the silence let him go, and lifting off pall after pall, reach to the inmost depth of all. A writer says, whenever you are in doubt as to the course you should pursue, after you have turned to every outward means of guidance, let the inward eye see, let the inward ear hear, and allow this simple, natural, beautiful process to go on unimpeded by questionings or doubts. In all dark hours and times of unwanted perplexity we need but to follow one simple direction, found, as all needed directions can be found, in that old book which so many read, but alas, so few interpret, enter into thine inner chamber and shut the door. Another writer says, one of the most intuitive men we have ever met had a desk in a city office where several other men were doing business constantly, and often talking loudly. Entirely undisturbed by the many and various sounds about him, this self-centered, faithful man would, in any moment of perplexity, draw the curtains of privacy so completely about him that he would be as fully enclosed in his own aura, and thereby as effectually removed from all distractions, as though he were alone in some primeval wood. Taking his difficulty with him into the mystic silence, in the form of a direct question to which he expected a direct answer, he would remain entirely passive until the reply came, and never once through many years' experience did he ever find himself disappointed or misled. Never forget that expectation and desire are bride and bridegroom, and forever inseparable, and you will soon find your hitherto darkened way grow luminous with celestial radiance, for with the heaven within, all heavens without you will incessantly cooperate. Ralph Waldo Trine, the popular writer of In Tune with the Infinite, says in that work, the great central fact in human life, in your own life and in mine, is the coming into a conscious vital realization of our oneness with this infinite life, and the opening of ourselves to this divine inflow. In just the degree that we come into a conscious realization of our oneness with the infinite life, and open ourselves to this divine inflow, do we actualize in ourselves the qualities and powers of the infinite life. In the degree that we come into this realization, and connect ourselves with this infinite source, do we make it possible for the higher powers to play, to work, to manifest in us. In the degree that we recognize Him as the infinite spirit of life and power that is today, at this moment, working and manifesting in and through all, and in the degree that we come into the realization of our oneness with this life, then, in that degree do we become partakers thereof, and so do we actualize in ourselves the qualities of His life. In the degree that we open ourselves to the inflowing tide of this immanent and transcendental life, do we make ourselves channels through which the infinite intelligence can work. In the above quotations, we see the insistence placed upon the degree of recognition and realization of the infinite presence power. The same insistence has always been placed upon it by the great spiritual teachers of all times, lands, and creeds. It is found to occupy a prominent place in the message of truth herein announced to you. It is an axiom of ancient and modern spiritual philosophy that spirit, the supreme presence power, the ultimate reality, identifies itself with the individual in the degree of the completeness and earnestness with which the individual identifies himself with it. This is the secret of spiritual power. Make it your own, and carry its spirit and meaning ever with you. Guard it well, never allow it to leave your possession. Above all, never lose it. Not merely in the silence should you make the mental contact with spirit. Outside of it, also, must you carry your consciousness of the essential identity of your individual spirit with the infinite spirit. You must always live, and move, and have your being in the consciousness that you, your I am I, is a focal point and center of consciousness, life, will, and power of spirit, and in the knowledge that, your consciousness of spirit is only a part of spirit's consciousness of itself. All bodies are modes of infinite extension, all souls but modes of infinite spiritual presence power. Never lose sight of this tremendous truth of your essential being, let it ever constitute a background for your thought, feeling, willing. In this consciousness of your essential identity with spirit, you may dwell in peace, security, and freedom. You become aware that you, verily, rest in the hollow of his hand, and that the sheltering and protecting arms are ever around and about you, that the unseen hand is ever extended to you, ready and willing to clasp your own hand and to lead, assist, guide and support you in the journey of life. In it, in hours of distress or need, you will feel yourself pressed up to the infinite breast, as the babe is to that of its mother. In it, you will become aware that, the kindly light, is ever there, shining, amidst the encircling gloom, and ever, leading you on, step by step, one step at a time, a true step, a sure step, a step toward attainment and victory. With the light of spiritual consciousness kindled within you, alive and burning bright, you may supplant fear with indomitable courage, supplant doubt and skepticism with the faith that knows, supplant sorrow with joy, supplant unrest with peace. In that infinite light, the brooding presence of spirit will hover over you, around you, about you. Standing on the solid rock of truth, you will find that its presence, its power, its peace, its joy, will be superimposed upon you, and its essence and livingness will enter into and permeate your entire being. When you wish to draw to yourself the rays of the presence power of spirit, in hours of special need, make use of the following mediation, which is, in substance and in spirit, that which has been handed down from teacher to student, from generation to generation, for many ages, in all lands, by the adherents of the great spiritual philosophy. It will help you to rediscover the light, if you have temporarily lost it. It will help you to discover the light if you have not already found it. In it burns brightly the flame of spirit, the only source of light, from whence all light comes. In it will be heeded your cry for light, more light. This infinite light of spirit will illumine the dark places of your soul, banishing doubt, gloom, fear, distrust. Spiritual meditation: banish from your consciousness the disturbing thoughts, ideas, feelings, and mental images of your finite and conditioned environment, and concentrate your entire attention upon spirit, the infinite and eternal presence power, the ultimate reality of existence. Think of its infinite and eternal life, its infinite and eternal consciousness, its infinite and eternal will, its infinite and eternal power. In this way you will flood your mind and soul with the infinite light, and all darkness of the soul will disappear. The dark night of the soul will be transformed into the high noon of spiritual daytime. Lift your thoughts from the temporal and fix them upon the eternal, raise your thoughts from the finite and fix them upon the infinite, elevate your thoughts from the changing and fix them upon the changeless. Then, having done this, you are prepared to return to the things and scenes of personal, finite, temporal, changing existence, again to take up your work, duties, service, to return, however, infinitely refreshed, reinvigorated, and filled with new life, spirit, courage, wisdom, and will. Here, we would call your attention to another important point concerning this contact with spirit, this unison with infinity, of which we have told you. The term unison means harmony, agreement, concord, union. In the present usage, the term carries with it the idea involved in its meaning when it is employed in relation to music, i.e., identity in pitch, coincidence of sounds proceeding from an equality in the number of vibrations made in a given time by two or more sonorous bodies. Even still more significant in this connection is the familiar idea of the attunement of the receiving and sending instruments in wireless telegraphy, or in the even more wonderful wireless radiophone. As you know, the ether may be filled with countless, wireless, messages or transmitted sounds, yet the receiving instrument will not pick up or record any of them unless it first be tuned to a pitch corresponding to that of the sending instruments. To all the receiving instruments not so attuned, it is practically as if these messages and waves of power were non-existent. Here we have a remarkable instance of those wonderful analogies which are found on all sides in nature, and which are indicated in that axiom of the Hermetic teachings, as above, so below, as within, so without, as in great, so in small. The fundamental idea involved in our thought concerning the unison between the individual spirit and the infinite spirit is based upon the fact expressed in the term vibrations, rightly understood. Not only are all material things in vibration, vibrating by reason of the influence of spirit upon them and of the spirit dwelling within them, but all spirit, and spirit itself, is to be conceived as vibrating. Nothing is motionless, everything is in motion, wherever there is spirit or spirit. It is true, as the ancient sages and their modern successors inform us, that there is a state of being in which the vibrations are of such infinite intensity and rapidity that all seems to be motionless, standing still, and at rest, but, at the last, this is perceived to be infinite motion and not motionlessness. Spiritual vibrations radiate and may be picked up by spiritual instruments properly attuned. Spirit is radioactive. When the individual soul becomes attuned to the oversoul, when the individual spirit is keyed to the pitch of spirit, then does the life, mind, will, strength of spirit flow into the individual spirit which is its focal center of expression and manifestation. When the individual spirit is so attuned to spirit, then not only do the messages of spirit reach its mind and soul, but also the power of spirit, its spiritual power, flows into the channels of the individual spirit, there to be used and employed by the latter when it has learned how to apply it properly. You have heard of the mental second wind, which, like the physical second wind that comes to the tired runner, so often is attained by one when he has become mentally exhausted. You have, moreover, most likely noted the suggestion of Professor William James that there is a third wind, a fourth, a fifth, a sixth, a seventh wind of physical, mental, and spiritual energy which become available to the individual who has learned to tap their sources. These sources are really phases of the infinite fount of all power which in this instruction we have called power, and which in its ultimate essence and nature is spiritual power. The great spiritual teachers of the race have always taught, and teach today, that this infinite fount of power is unlimited and inexhaustible in extent, amount, and degree, its apparent limitations being caused solely by the incapacity of the individual to receive and apply that power. By contacting the infinite supply, by becoming in unison with infinity, by adjusting your spiritual receiving apparatus, you may pick up and make use of the constant and unfailing current of spiritual vibrations which are forever being radiated and emanated by spirit, the fount of all power. This is far more than a mere figure of speech or metaphorical representation, it is the expression in physical terms of a tremendous truth of spiritual power. Its truth may be proved by you in your own actual experience, provided that you will but go about it in the right way, and we have pointed out to you that right way. It is not enough that you should perceive, recognize, and realize the truth concerning spiritual power. You should also manifest its energies which are available to you, you should demonstrate the truth in your everyday life and work. The infinite spiritual power is not static, it is dynamic. It is not for rest, it is for use, action, and employment in the activities of the world. It is impossible, however, for you to possess any marked degree of the perception, recognition, and realization of this truth without also manifesting and demonstrating it in at least some degree. Even a partial perception and realization of the infinite presence power of spirit will impart to you an increased efficiency, proficiency, and method of application of its energies and forces. Conscious application of spiritual power soon passes down to the plane of your subconscious, and thereafter becomes habitual and instinctive with you. By the right application of spiritual power you open the doors of the storehouse of the infinite supply. The infinite supply furnishes the material and means wherewith wants, necessities and needs are supplied, filled, gratified, satisfied. All material, and all forces, are under the control of spiritual power. You are entitled to all that is necessary for your full, rightful expression of the life and spirit within you. The material for your needs is contained within the substance which is plastic and responsive to the power of the Spirit. Spirit contains all the power necessary to mold and shape that material into objective form. All that is needed by you is the faith and will to apply that power which is within you. Throughout all nature we find the operation of the law of supply, the law of use. All life instinctively draws upon the infinite supply for all that is required for its normal needs, requirements, necessities. The existence of an instinctive want implies the existence of the supply of material which will satisfy it. This implicit promise of supply is found in all nature. Its spirit is voiced in the inspired statement that the Lord will provide. This promise is not a vain mockery, it is a grand truth of existence. The supply is always there, the creature has but to open its channels to the inflow, and to reach out toward the source. Having obtained lawful and rightful access to the great storehouse of the infinite supply, and knowing yourself to be the true heir to its treasures, your supply is then limited only by your capacity for finding out that which you need for your rightful expression of life. That capacity may be developed and perfected by you by means of an increasing degree of unison with infinity, of a fuller perception, recognition, and realization of the truth concerning spiritual power. The supply is equal to the demand, but the demand must be made properly, confidently, and with faith and courage. When you set into operation the spiritual power at your disposal, you will begin to attract to yourself that which is necessary for your use, need, and support, that which will relieve and remove your lack and want. You will do this in precisely the same way that the lilies of the field attract to themselves that which they need for their support and use, that which raises them up to that state of natural magnificence excelling even Solomon in all his glory, as you have been told by a high spiritual authority. You are a creator. You create your environment, you have always done so. Whether you consciously will to do so or not, your spiritual forces are always working in this way. Consciously or unconsciously, willingly or unwillingly, you are setting into operation great spiritual forces which produce certain material effects. You are a builder, a creator, even though you know it not. This being so, wisdom dictates that you build intelligently, and in accordance with your heart's desire. So, build the more stately mansions, O my soul, should ever be your demand. Build for yourself the kind of world of which you have dreamed. Make your dreams come true. Trine voices a great truth when he says, each is building his own world. We build from within, and we attract from without. Thought is the force with which we build, and thoughts are forces. Like builds like, and like attracts like. In the degree that thought is spiritualized does it become more subtle and powerful in its workings. This spiritualizing is in accordance with law, and is within the power of all. Everything is first worked out in the unseen before it is manifested in the seen, in the ideal, before it is realized in the real, in the spiritual, before it shows forth in the material. The realm of the unseen is the realm of cause. The realm of the seen is the realm of effect. The nature of an effect is always determined and conditioned by the nature of its cause. In this book we do not attempt to give you specific directions for the employment of spiritual power in any of its many possible particular forms of use and application. In other books of this series we have pointed out to you how you may effectively employ this spiritual power, transmuted into personal power, in many different forms of its effective application. In the first book of the series, the one entitled Personal Power, we have shown you that all personal power proceeds, directly or indirectly, from a great principle of all power which we call, simply, power. In the present book we have identified this power principle with spirit, and have shown you that all power is spiritual power, at the last analysis. In this book, also, we have shown you that this spiritual power, this power of spirit, may be drawn upon freely by your individual spirit when it enters into conscious unison with infinity, in attunement with spirit. Each other book of this series is a key unlocking some particular door of personal power. The present volume is the master key which releases the master lock, without which the individual key will not be able to turn the individual lock and thus open its particular door. If you are acquainted with the operation of the locks upon the boxes of the safe deposit vaults of the large cities, you will understand more clearly this illustration. Lacking the master key, you will never be able to secure the full measure of personal power in any of its phases, nor will you ever be able to employ that power most intelligently, to the best advantage, and with the highest degree of efficiency. The knowledge of spirit, the infinite and eternal, ultimate and sovereign, presence power, constitutes that which, when known, causes all else to be known, concerning the manifestation of personal power. A writer has said of this knowledge of truth and power that it hews open the path, as the lightning splits the darkness. It dissolves doubts, cuts knots of chronic impossibility, melts circumstances, pierces shadows like a flash of glory, dashes through the jungle of appearances like the horn of a unicorn. The little occult manual, believed by many to have been inspired, to which we have previously referred, contains the following instructive and suggestive bit of esoteric teaching. It refers to the battle of life on the plane of material existence, and of the real self, spirit, which abides as the inner self of the individual spirit, and which springs to action when it is perceived, recognized, realized and acknowledged by the individual soul, and when its aid and service is demanded by the latter as its rightful heritage. Listen to the voice of the message. Stand aside in the coming battle, and, though thou fightest, be not thou the warrior. Look for the warrior, and let him fight in thee. Take his orders for battle, and obey him. Obey him, not as though he were a general, but as though he were thyself, yet infinitely wiser and stronger than thyself. Look for him, else in the fever and hurry of the fight thou mayest pass him, and he will not know thee unless thou knowest him. If thy cry reach his listening ear, then will he fight in thee, and fill the dull void therein. And, if this is so, then canst thou go through the fight cool and unwearied, standing aside, and letting him battle for thee. Then it will be impossible for thee to strike one blow amiss. But if thou look not for him, if thou pass him by, there is no safeguard for thee. Thy brain will reel, thy heart will grow uncertain, and, in the dust of the battlefield, thy sight and senses will fail, and thou wilt not know thy friends from thy enemies. He is thyself, yet thou art but finite and liable to error. He is eternal, and is sure. He is eternal truth. When once he has entered thee, and become thy warrior, he will never utterly desert thee, and, in the day of the great peace he will become one with thee. You can stand upright now, firm as a rock amid the turmoil, obeying the warrior who is thyself and thy king. Unconcerned in the battle save to do his bidding, having no longer any care as to the result of the battle, for one thing only is important, that the warrior shall win, and you know that he is incapable of defeat, standing thus, cool and awakened, use the hearing that you have acquired by pain and the destruction of pain. Carry with you the echo of the concluding words of the message of truth as presented to you in this instruction, in the degree that you perceive, recognize and realize your essential identity with me, the Supreme Presence Power, the ultimate reality, in that degree will you receive and be able to manifest my spiritual power. I am over and above you, under and beneath you. I surround you on all sides, I am also within you, and you are in me, from me you proceed, and in me you live, and move and have your being. Seek me by looking within your own being, and likewise by looking for me in infinity, for I abide both within and without your being. If, and when, you will adopt and live according to this truth, then will you be able to manifest that truth, in and by it alone are freedom and invincibility, and true and real presence and power to be found, perceived, realized and manifested. Thought Power, Radio-Mentalism. The Power of Thought. In this book you are asked to consider a strange phase of personal power, a mysterious phase of your mental power, an aspect of your individual power which perhaps intuitively you have realized to be possessed by you, but which in all probability you have not understood in the same way in which you have understood the other phases of your personal power. Yet this strange phase of your power is quite as natural as are those most familiar to you. There is nothing supernatural about it. It falls into its place in the natural order of things. It is governed by natural law and order. Like all the other forms of personal power to which we have directed your attention in the several other volumes of this series, this phase or form of personal power is one of the instruments or channels of expression of the powers of the I element of yourself, of that fundamental something, the existence of which you assert when you say, I am I, and which is the base and ground, the center and the focal point, of all of your conscious states. This I am I, in fact, is a focalized center of expression of that all-power from which all power proceeds, and in which we live, and move, and have our being, an expression of that which in this instruction is known as power. The particular phase of personal power which you are here asked to consider is known as thought power. By this term, however, we do not mean the exercise of the faculties of thought along the lines of logical reasoning, induction, analogy, judgment, etc., nor along the lines of creative and constructive imagination, inventive effort, etc., both of which lines we have considered in detail in other volumes of this series. The phase before you for consideration is that which is concerned with the influence of your mental states, particularly your ideas and mental pictures, over persons, things, and conditions external to yourself, with the influence exerted by your thoughts over your environment in general. Up until about 40 years ago, the serious assertion that one's thoughts exerted an influence extending far beyond the physical organ in which they were generated, which influence produced effects upon distant persons, things, and conditions, would have been received with the utmost incredulity, disbelief, ridicule and derision on the part of the general public. Such a statement would have been interpreted as an expression of gross superstition, credulity, and lack of common sense. In fact, in many cases the sanity of the person making the statement actually would have been questioned. But during the past 40 years, particularly during the last 20 years, there has been quite a change in the public belief concerning this general subject. At the present time the statement above alluded to is regarded as quite familiar, trite and commonplace, even though the hearer may not accept it as correct. It would be difficult in these times to find a person of ordinary intelligence who has not at least heard frequent references made to the power of thought operating actively in affecting physical states for better or worse, and in affecting one's environment in the same way. Indeed, it is not too much to say that at the present time the great majority of persons accept the theory and principle of thought power, as above explained to some extent, the degree of acceptance ranging from complete and earnest belief down to the general belief that there is something in it. The principles of thought power, in fact, have been adopted by many schools, cults, sects, quasi-religious organizations, etc., and have been employed as the base and ground of numerous ologies and isms. In many such cases, however, the fundamental principles have been so embellished with non-essential coverings of theory, doctrine, dogma and claimed authority, that the basic truths and facts are in danger of being lost sight of by the ordinary individual who is ignorant of the history of the thought on the subject, and of the true principles involved. In many cases the extraneous materials which have been added are of such fantastic and bizarre character that the ordinary observer is bewildered and confused, and is apt to dismiss the whole subject as too much for me. Yet the elemental principles involved are quite simple, and the laws under which they manifest and operate are quite easily understood by any person of average intelligence. In the present book we shall confine ourselves to the presentation of the plain, simple, scientific principles which careful thought has discovered to underlie the entire subject and to explain the entire range of the phenomena. We shall accompany this presentation of scientific principles with instruction along the lines of the most effective and scientific methods of applying those principles in the practical affairs of everyday life. The entire treatment of principle and practice shall be scientific, quite as scientific as would be an efficient treatment and presentation of the subject of electricity, or of any other branch of physical science. This, because thought power, like every other form of power manifested in the universe, has a natural, scientific foundation, ground, and base, and is under natural law and order. There is no more reason for the subject of thought power being surrounded by a mass of non-essential, extraneous material of quasi-religious, technical, metaphysical, or esoteric theories, doctrines or dogmas, than there is for the subject of electricity, physical power of any kind, or any phase of physical science, being so conditioned. What would be thought of one who would seriously attempt to teach the subject of the principles and application of electricity as a part of some quasi-religious, metaphysical doctrines, or esoteric teaching? The verdict would be that such a person was going a long distance out of his way, and that he was attempting to obscure simple natural principles by a covering of supernatural teaching. Yet this is just what many of the cults and schools have been more or less successfully doing in the case of thought power. This does not mean that the subject of thought power is opposed in any way to true religious feeling or thought, or to rational metaphysical or philosophical teachings. On the contrary, we hold that true religious feeling and thought constitute a true tower of strength for the individual, and that rational metaphysical and philosophical knowledge enables the individual more intelligently to apply any and all of his powers. The distinction we wish to make is merely that thought power, like any other form of natural power, does not depend upon any particular religious, quasi-religious, metaphysical, philosophical, or esoteric doctrine, theory, dogma, or teaching. Like any other natural force, thought power operates along well-established natural lines, and may be successfully applied by anyone intelligently understanding the laws and order of its manifestation. Again, like any other natural force, thought power is no respecter of persons, it has no favorites among individuals. It affects all who come under its influence, unless they know how to divert its energy. It may be misused as well as used properly, it may bring pain as well as pleasure, harm as well as benefit, according to its direction and application. It may be bad as well as good, according to its use and direction, and according to the moral character of the person employing it. Like electricity, gravitation, light, heat, mechanical force, it is open to all persons, good and bad, high and low, just and unjust, provided that they know how to call into operation its forces. It may be set into operation by subconscious effort as well as conscious. Anyone, everyone, who can think has at his disposal that which we call thought power, which will respond to his efforts to set it into activity. In nature's plans, it follows the same general rule which governs all of the natural forces, energies and powers. In our presentation of this important subject of thought power, however, we do not ask you to set aside or to discard, even for the time being, any of your favorite religious, quasi-religious, metaphysical, or philosophical beliefs or doctrines. The writers of this book entertain certain beliefs of this kind, perhaps the very ones entertained by you, and they hold fast to these, even though they may not introduce them into these pages. They merely ask you to be willing to follow them in their consideration of thought power as a purely natural force or power, just as you would have them consider electricity, gravitation, etc. They ask you to accompany them in their consideration of the subject of thought power along the lines of scientific treatment, rather than that of metaphysical, philosophical, or religious speculation, doctrine, or dogma. With the above understanding, let us now proceed to the consideration of the principles of thought power, and of the methods underlying the efficient application of those principles. Radioactive thought. In our consideration of thought power, we are not concerned with the nature of the ultimate character of mind, or of spirit in its ultimate essence. Neither are we concerned with the precise nature of the relation between mind or spirit and the physical mechanism through which they, or it, manifest in the processes of thought. Enough for the purposes of the present consideration is the evident fact that what we know as thought consists of a process or series of processes in which the mechanism of the brain cells and brain substance is involved and employed by the natural energies playing upon it in some way as yet unknown to science. That thought is a process or a series of processes in which energy plays upon the physical mechanism of the brain is admitted by the most careful scientific thought of today. The phenomena of thought can be scientifically explained in no other way. Without brain substance and cells there can be no process of thought such as we know by that term. That energy of some kind is involved in such processes is undoubted by any scientific thinker. Thought is under natural law and order, and maintains an orderly trend and sequence in accordance with it. Thought processes may be measured, weighed, and gauged by delicate instruments designed in the modern psychological laboratories. Science is concerned only with the way things act, the laws governing their processes, and the orderly trend manifested in these processes. It does not attempt to go beyond these processes, if it be true science. It does not speculate concerning the ultimate nature of things, with first principles, or with ultimate realities. It is concerned with the pragmatic idea of how things work, and does not invade the field of things in themselves, i.e., things considered apart from their activities and phenomena. The latter class of speculations and inquiries belongs properly to metaphysical and philosophical thought, or is attached to religious faith. In our present inquiry, therefore, you are at liberty to have and to hold your own particular metaphysical, philosophical, or religious views concerning the ultimate nature of mind or spirit, to think of these as things in themselves, if you so wish. All we ask you to do is to consider the processes of thought, i.e., how thought works, as discovered by scientific inquiry, and supported by the indisputable facts of the case. You are asked to concede the fact that the brain substance and the brain cells are employed as the mechanism of thought, or the instruments of thought. This is asking you merely to admit what you already know to be a fact. You are also asked to regard the thought processes as being set into operation by the presence and power of some form of energy, i.e., by some internal or inherent power which is capable of acting, operating, or producing effects. This also is self-evident. You are also asked to accept the acknowledged and demonstrated fact that in the processes of thought there is an expenditure of energy, and a consuming or combustion of brain material sufficient at times to increase the temperature of the brain area involved in the process. These are axiomatic truths of physiological psychology, originally arrived at by observation, experiment and careful tests. So far, you will note, you have been asked to accept merely that which is accepted by ordinary scientific thought, and which forms a part of the general knowledge of every person of ordinary education and intelligence. You are now also to be asked to accept, at least tentatively, another truth, or statement of facts, which is far from being so well known or accepted by the average person, and which still remains in the category of disputed facts in the realm of scientific thought, but which is fast becoming more widely and generally accepted by scientific minds, and which is receiving almost daily additional supporting and corroborating experimental evidence and proof. We have reference to the statement or assertion that thought is radioactive, i.e., is capable of being radiated over space external to the brain in which it is generated, there to produce effects and to cause results. This statement is supported by the enormous body of evidence concerning the existence of the phenomena of telepathy, thought transference, thought transmission, etc., which has accumulated by reason of the investigations and researches of scientific investigators extending over the period of the past 40 years or more. These discoveries have served to explain and account for much that formerly was classed as supernatural or occult. Such phenomena are now brought under the category of natural law and order. It is scarcely too much to say that 9 out of every 10 persons will be found to have had some personal experience along the general lines of thought transmission, or, as it is now generally termed, telepathy. Many experiences of common occurrence in the life of the average individual can be explained and accounted for only upon the general theory of thought radioactivity, as above defined. In addition to the testimony and general experiences above mentioned, scientific thinkers have demonstrated logically that, theoretically at least, thought radioactivity is quite reasonable and logical, and is entitled to a respectful hearing and investigation at the hands of all true scientific persons. In fact, the many recent important discoveries concerning the existence of radioactive powers in various substances, and arising from many different forms of natural energy, may be said to render it quite reasonable, by analogy, to look for the presence of radioactivity in brain substance, this resulting from mental activity, even in absence of the supporting facts and experiences, and to justify the confident expectation of finding it there even if it had never before been discovered. Let us quote for your information the statements of 2 eminent scientists serving to demonstrate the scientific reasonableness of the presence and power of radioactivity in the thought processes, as follows. Sir William Crookes, President of the Royal Society of England, in an address delivered before that society in Bristol, England, as early as the year 1898, long before the general scientific thought had been favorably directed toward the subject, said, "Were I now introducing for the first time these inquiries to the world of science, I should choose a starting point different from that of old, where we formerly began. It would be well to begin with telepathy, with that fundamental law, as I believe it to be, that thoughts and images may be transferred from one mind to another without the agency of the recognized organs of sense, that knowledge may enter the human mind without being communicated in any hitherto known or recognized ways. If telepathy takes place, we have two physical facts, the physical change in the brain of A, the suggester, and the analogous physical change in the brain of B, the recipient of the suggestion. Between these two physical events there must exist a train of physical causes. It is unscientific to call in the aid of mysterious agencies, when with every fresh advance in knowledge it is shown that ether vibrations have powers and attributes abundantly able to meet any demand, even the transmission of thought. It is supposed by some physiologists that the essential cells of nerves do not actually touch, but are separated by a narrow gap which widens in sleep while it narrows almost to extinction during mental activity. This condition is so singularly like a Branly or Lodge coherer, device which led to the discovery of wireless telegraphy, as to suggest a further analogy. The structure of brain and nerve being similar, it is conceivable that there may be present masses of such nerve coherers in the brain, whose special function it may be to receive impulses brought from without, through the connecting sequence of ether waves of appropriate order of magnitude. Röntgen has familiarized us with an order of vibrations of extreme minuteness as compared with the smallest waves with which we have hitherto been acquainted, and there is no reason to suppose that we have here reached the limit of frequency. It is known that the action of thought is accompanied by certain molecular movements of the brain, and here we have physical vibrations capable from their extreme minuteness of acting direct upon individual molecules, while their rapidity approaches that of internal and external movements of the atoms themselves. A formidable array of phenomena must be scientifically sifted before we effectually grasp a faculty so strange, so bewildering, and for ages so inscrutable, as the direct action of mind upon mind. Camille Flammarion, the eminent French scientist, said, "The action of one mind upon another at a distance, the transmission of thought, mental communication at a distance, all these are not more extraordinary than the action of the magnet on iron, the influence of the moon on the sea, the transportation of the human voice by electricity, the revelation of the chemical constituents of a star by the analysis of its light, or, indeed, all the wonders of contemporary science. What is certain is that telepathy can and ought to be henceforth considered by science as an incontestable reality, that minds are able to act upon each other without the intervention of the senses, that psychic force exists, though its nature is yet unknown." We now call your attention to the following statement of Bain, the eminent authority upon the subject of the relation of mind and body, not only because of its own importance, but also because of its office as an approach to the two several quotations immediately following it. Professor Bain said, "The structure of the nervous substances, and the experiments made upon the nerves and nerve centers, establish beyond doubt certain peculiarities as belonging to the force that is exercised by the brain. This force is of a current nature, that is to say, a power generated at one part of the structure is conveyed along an intervening substance and discharged at some other part. The different forms of electricity and magnetism have made us familiar with this kind of action." Dr. Frank Channing Haddock says, "All states of body and mind involve constant molecular and chemical change. The suggestion arises that the brain, with its millions of cells and its inconceivable changes in substance, may be regarded as a transmitting and receiving battery. The brain being a kind of battery, and the nerves conductors of released stored energy to different parts of the body, by a kind of action similar to the actions of electricity and magnetism, it is suggested that, either by means of the ether, or of some still finer form of matter, discharges of brain energy may be conducted beyond the limits of the body. If the nerve tracts correspond to wires, this refined medium may correspond to the ether fields supposed to be employed in wireless telegraphy. As electrical movements are conducted without wires or other visible media, so may brain discharges be conveyed beyond the mechanism of the battery, without the intervention of nerves, except as they may constitute a part of the battery. Generally speaking, such discharges would originate in two ways, by direct mental action, or by mental or physical states, perhaps by a combination. Our final quotation, to which the last two preceding quotations logically lead, is from Professor Ockerwicz, the eminent psychologist and scientific investigator, who says, "Every living being is a dynamic focus. A dynamic focus tends ever to propagate the motion that is proper to it. Propagated motion becomes transformed according to the medium it traverses. Motion always tends to propagate itself. Therefore, when we see work of any kind, mechanical, electrical, nervic or psychic, disappearing without visible effect, then, one of two things has occurred, either, 1, a transmission, or, 2, a transformation. Where does the first end, and where does the second begin? In an identical medium there is only transmission. In a different medium there is transformation. You send an electric current through a thick wire. You have the current, but you do not perceive any other force. But, cut that thick wire and connect the ends by means of a finer wire, the fine wire will grow hot, there will be a transformation of a part of the current into heat. Take a pretty strong current and interpose a wire still more resistant, or a very thin carbon rod. The carbon will emit light. A part of the current then is transformed into heat and light. The light acts in every direction roundabout, first visibly as light, then invisibly as heat and electric current. Hold a magnet near it. If the magnet is weak and movable, in the form of a magnetic needle, the beam of light will cause it to deviate. If it is strong and immovable, it will in turn cause the beam of light to deviate. And all this at a distance, without contact, without special conductors. A process that is at once chemical, physical and psychical goes on in a brain. A complex action of this kind is propagated through the gray matter, as waves are propagated in water. Regarded on its physiological side, an idea is only a vibration that is propagated, yet which does not pass out of the medium in which it can exist as such. It is propagated as far as other like vibrations allow. It is propagated more widely if it assumes the character which subjectively we call emotive. But it cannot go beyond without being transformed. Nevertheless, like force in general, it cannot remain in isolation, it escapes in disguise. Thought stays at home, as the chemical action of a battery remains in the battery, it is represented abroad by its dynamic correlate, called in the case of the battery, a current, and in the case of the brain, I know not what, but whatever its name may be, it is the dynamic correlate of thought. I have chosen to use the term dynamic correlate. There is something more than that, the universe is neither void nor dead. A force that is transmitted meets other forces, and if it is transformed only little by little, it usually limits itself to modifying another force at its own cost, though without suffering perceptibly thereby. This is the case particularly with forces that are persistent, concentrated, well seconded by their medium. It is the case with the physiological equilibrium, nervic force, psychic force, ideas, emotions, tendencies. These modify environing forces without themselves disappearing, they are but imperceptibly transformed, and if the other mind is of a nature exceptionally well adapted to them, they gain in inductive action. We would call your attention to that part of the above quotation in which it is pointed out that the action of the beam of electric light on a weak, movable magnet, and the action of a strong and immovable magnet on the beam of electric light, is exerted from a distance, without contact, without special conductors. You will note that Professor Ockerwicz holds that a similar action, from a distance, without contact, without special conductors, occurs in the processes of thought transmission, or thought radioactivity. He speaks of thought vibrations being, but imperceptibly transformed, and holds that under certain favorable conditions, they gain in inductive action. We ask you to make a mental note of this term, inductive action, for it serves to indicate the nature of the action of the radioactive thought vibrations which we are now considering. By inductive action is meant action from a distance, without contact, without special conductors. The term induction, in its usage in connection with physics, is defined as the property or process by which one body having electrical or magnetic polarity produces it in another body without direct contact. A leading textbook says, if an electrified body is brought near an uncharged one, either conductor or non-conductor, the latter will exhibit electrical forces. It is said to be charged by induction. Similarly, if there is a magnet surrounded by a uniform medium, such as air, and if a body of a different kind of material from the medium is brought near the magnet, it will exhibit magnetic forces and is said to be magnetized by induction. Now, all investigation of the phenomena of thought transmission seems to reveal a condition of affairs which can best be accounted for and explained upon the respective theories of 1. The radioactivity of thought, and 2. The inductive action of thought. That is to say, that 1. Thought radiates power capable of causing effects and producing results at a distance, and 2. Thought exerts an inductive action, from a distance, without contact, without special conductors. It would seem that the process of radioactivity and the power of inductive action which is admitted to be present in the physical world, has its counterpart or correspondence in the mental world, the same general laws governing each, and a general analogy existing between the two classes of phenomena. While some of the more conservative and orthodox scientists hold that as yet the hypotheses of thought radioactivity and thought inductive action, respectively, have not been sufficiently proved to raise the hypotheses into the category of natural laws, yet the mass of supporting evidence, and the reasoning based upon the same, is sufficiently strong to justify the careful scientific thinker in accepting these two hypotheses at least tentatively, as working hypotheses, by means of which thought along these lines, and further experimental work, are rendered easier. Certainly, no one thoroughly acquainted with the facts of the case, with the phenomena of thought transmission, will deny that thought acts as if it were radioactive and capable of exerting inductive action. In the absence of better hypotheses, at least, we are justified in adopting the two just mentioned as working hypotheses for convenience of thought on the subject, and as an aid in further investigations. Accordingly, in this book, we shall assume as working hypotheses the radioactivity of thought, and the inductive action of thought, respectively. Let us now proceed to a consideration of the observed phenomena of thought power, in which the radioactivity of thought, and the inductive action of thought are held to be manifested. Thought atmospheres. The recognition of the presence of radioactivity in the processes of thought, and the realization of the power of thought to exert inductive action at a distance, without contact, serves to illuminate what was formerly a dark corner of the streets of human experience, to throw a bright light upon certain places in which objects previously had been seen but dimly, and in which they took upon themselves distorted form. We refer to the phenomena which are generally classed as the thought atmospheres of persons and places. It certainly requires no extended argument to prove that there exists in connection with persons and places a certain subtle influence which may well be called an atmosphere of a psychic order, which produces an effect upon persons coming within the field of induction of the persons or places manifesting that atmosphere. These psychic atmospheres were formerly held to be related in some way to the supernatural, or else to be connected with some mysterious and occult powers of the universe which were outside of the realm of ordinary natural laws. But, thanks to the persistent and patient labors of the investigators, it is now known that these psychic atmospheres are quite as natural as are the fields of induction, of electricity and magnetism, and quite as truly are under natural law and order. They are now recognized as phases of the general phenomena caused by radioactive thought and the inductive action of thought. These psychic atmospheres may be considered as divided into two general classes, as follows. 1. The thought atmospheres surrounding the person of the individual radiating the thought, and accompanying him wherever he moves or travels. 2. The thought atmosphere of places which are caused by the radioactive thought of the persons inhabiting these places, or who have previously inhabited them. Let us now consider each of these two classes in the order in which they are above stated. The thought atmospheres of persons. Each and every person has a thought atmosphere, or aura, surrounding him, which reflects the general character of his thought, his feelings, and his general mental character. This atmosphere or aura is composed of and constituted by the vibrations of his radioactive thought, which are analogous to the vibrations of light, heat, electricity, or magnetism. It is constantly renewed by the mental currents which are pouring out from the mental organism of the person. These thought vibrations of this thought atmosphere more or less affect other persons coming within their field of induction. You know, from your own experience and that of others with which you are familiar, that when you meet a stranger, and have directed your attention to him, you are conscious of something about him, which produces a certain effect upon you, and which creates in your mind a more or less definite impression regarding him, very often a quite marked feeling of like or dislike. In some cases, even though your attention has not been directed toward the person, that something about him is so strong and active that it attracts and holds your attention, and makes you take notice of him. You have shared the experience of many persons when, on certain occasions, you have been vividly impressed by the entrance of some particular person into a room, or office, or other place. There has been nothing out of the ordinary in the appearance of the person, or in his dress, carriage, or general manner, but, nevertheless, you have felt in some way that there is something unusual about him. In some cases, you have experienced at once a marked attraction to, or perhaps a marked repulsion from certain individuals. In other cases you have recognized a peculiar air of authority about certain persons, others have seemed to carry with them an atmosphere of success, others have seemed to be surrounded by a cloud of failure, lack of confidence, etc. Some have seemed to radiate cheerfulness and optimism, others have seemed to emanate gloom, pessimism, and discouragement. To some you have felt what may be called an affinity, to others you may have felt an actual antipathy. Some persons seem to exert a thought influence extending merely to a field immediately around them. Others seem to fill a room with their personality as soon as they enter it, or at least as soon as they direct their attention to the persons in the room. Others, still, seemingly experience no difficulty in extending their thought radiations so as to influence strongly a large number of people. The whole audience, assemblage, or congregation feels the presence of such a person as soon as he addresses them. Some exceptionally magnetic individuals, some great actors or orators, manifest thought atmospheres composed of thought vibrations so active and powerful that they fairly carry by storm the emotional natures of immense bodies of people, and sweep them off their feet in spite of their reason and will. Some persons impress you at once as being positive, resourceful, self-confident individuals, others produce upon you the impression that they are negative, weak, colorless, non-resourceful, and lacking in self-confidence. Some are live wires, others are dead ones. You feel this instinctively even before the person says a word or performs an action. It is not exactly as if you think the thing concerning the person in such cases, it is rather as if you feel it in some subtle indefinable way. If you have ever had the actual experience, you will know that it is more than the suggestion of manner, action, appearance, dress, words, etc. It is something that you feel about the person independent of your reasoning on the subject of his personality. The report seems to come from the emotional region of your mental being, rather than from the logical one. When the experiences and phenomena just related are examined in the light of the hypotheses of thought radioactivity, and the inductive action of thought, respectively, the whole subject assumes a reasonable, natural aspect, it loses its supernatural or occult garments. When you see that thought, like light, heat, magnetism, or electricity, is radioactive, that it radiates currents and waves of vibratory force in all directions, then the presence of the atmosphere of the person ceases to be mysterious. Likewise, when you perceive that just as a magnetized or electrified body tends to induce a like state in other bodies at a distance from it, without direct contact, setting up in them similar vibrations, then you find it quite natural that you should feel in your emotional nature a certain stirring concerning the people you meet, and you also understand more clearly the influence of certain persons over others, over audiences, crowds, congregations, etc. Thought radiation and thought induction give you the key to many experiences and phenomena which heretofore have been deep mysteries to you, and which perhaps you have regarded as uncanny, supernatural, or occult. The thought atmospheres of places. Just as you have noticed that persons have their peculiar atmospheres representing their mental activities, so you have noticed that many places have their particular atmospheres which, by induction, register their character upon your mentality, and cause you to become aware of the general mental qualities of those who inhabit or occupy them, or who previously have done so. You have noticed that residences, apartments, or rooms frequently produce effects upon you which can be accounted for in no ordinary way. Some such places seem to emanate cheerfulness, harmony, and other uplifting mental qualities, while others seem to be permeated with a negative, depressing influence which affects you more or less unless you throw it off in some way. In the same way, certain shops, stores, offices, and other places of business either attract or repel you, either create confidence or distrust on your part, in some subtle way not explainable by their general appearances. It is not too much to say that every place has its own atmosphere, its own character. If you have ever visited a prison or similar place, you have doubtless been struck with the feeling that some subtle, invisible miasma pervades it, rendering you most uncomfortable while within its walls, and causing you to experience a feeling of relief after you have left the place. This, even though the institution may be built and conducted according to modern ideas, and is thus lacking in the depressing suggestiveness of the old, gloomy surroundings. In some hospitals you have experienced a similar depressing feeling, accompanied by a strong desire to escape from the negative influences manifesting within them. On the other hand, you have experienced the restful, uplifting, peaceful atmosphere of certain churches, cathedrals, chapels, and other places in which persons have habitually manifested the higher forms of thought and feeling. In some libraries you have experienced the atmosphere of study, deep thought, investigation and general intellectual activity. In some great places of business you have experienced the feeling of efficiency, industry, purposeful effort, and careful management. In short, you have found that you catch the spirit of many places visited by you. You know that there are certain places which you like to visit because of their good effects upon you, and other places which you avoid visiting so far as possible, because of their usual bad effect upon you. Some places rest you, others tire you, some rouse ambition and aspiration in you, others cause you to feel depressed and discouraged. Some seem pure and clean to you, while others impress you with the sense of impurity and mental and moral uncleanliness. The explanation of this class of phenomena is found in the hypotheses to which we have called your attention in this book, viz., that of the radioactivity of thought, and that of the inductive action of thought, respectively. The fact is that every human mind is constantly emitting radiations or currents of thought vibrations representing the general character of his or her thoughts. These naturally form the thought atmosphere of the places in which such persons dwell or do business. When there are a number of persons continuously present in a place, their combined thought vibrations combine and coalesce, and form a composite thought atmosphere. In many cases, the thought of a place is determined by the character of those in authority in that place, those who impose character and certain lines of conduct upon those under their control. This accounts for the character and atmosphere of stores, shops, offices, etc. But the character and atmosphere of a place is created and determined not merely by the quality of the thought being radiated by those inhabiting it at that moment. The past thought influences are strongly impressed upon many places. This may seem strange to you at first thought, but when you examine similar phenomena in the realm of nature you will begin to understand the principle at work in the case. There is nothing mysterious, supernatural, or occult in such phenomena. Natural law and order is manifest in them, just as in all other natural phenomena. You need not go outside of nature for the explanation. The heat emitted by a stove will remain in a room long after the fire has died out, or the stove withdrawn. The subtle odor of a flower, perfume, or of other substances, will permeate a place long after those substances have been removed from it. The odor of coffee, cheese, leather, etc., will cling to a store which years before was used for the purpose of storing these articles. Dresser drawers, cabinets, old letters, etc., will retain for many years the fragrance of the perfume which long ago was applied to them, or placed within them. Astronomers tell us that the light we now see streaming from some of the far distant stars really was emitted by those bodies many thousands of years ago, and that if one of those stars were destroyed today, its light would continue to travel in space for many thousand years in the future. Oliver Wendell Holmes said, "What? You cannot conceive of a charge of cerebricity fastening itself on a letter sheet and clinging to it for weeks, while it was shuffling about in mailbags, rolling over the ocean, and shaken up in railroad cars. And yet the odor of a grain of musk will hang around a note or address for a lifetime." Do you not remember what Professor Silliman says, in that pleasant journal of his, about the little ebony cabinet which Mary, Queen of Scots, brought with her from France, how its drawers still exhale the sweetest perfumes? If they could hold their sweetness for more than 200 years, why should not a written page retain for a week or a month the equally mysterious effluence poured over it from thinking marrow, and diffuse its vibrations to another excitable center? Professor Draper, illustrating the subtle effects of light, said, "Upon the walls of our most private apartments, where we think the eye of intrusion is altogether shut out and our retirement can never be profaned, there exists the vestiges of all our acts, silhouettes of whatever we have done. A shadow never falls upon a wall without leaving thereupon a permanent trace, a trace which might be made visible by resorting to proper processes. Photographic operations are cases in point. The portraits of our friends, or landscape views, may be hidden on the sensitive surface from the eye, but they are ready to make their appearance as soon as proper developers are resorted to. A specter is concealed on a silver or glassy surface until, by our necromancy, we make it come forth into the visible world. Radiant forces are passing from all objects to all objects in their vicinity, and during every moment of the day or night are daguerreotyping the appearance of each upon the other, the images thus made, not merely resting upon the surface, but sinking into the interior of them. They're held with astonishing tenacity, and only waiting for a suitable application to reveal themselves to the inquiring gaze. You cannot, then, enter a room night or day but you leave on going out your portrait behind you. You cannot lift your hand, or wink your eye, or the wind stir a hair of your head, but each movement is infallibly registered for coming ages. The pane of glass in the window, the brick in the wall, and the paving stone in the street, catch the pictures of all passers-by, and faithfully preserve them. Not a leaf waves, not an insect crawls, not a ripple moves, but each motion is recorded by 1,000 faithful scribes in infallible and indelible scripture. Professor William Denton says, all bodies, organic bodies more especially, are transmitting influences continually to surrounding objects, the tendency of which is to bring these objects into a similar condition to their own. Not more certainly does a rose diffuse its fragrance than human beings dispense their influence wherever they go. We are each surrounded by an atmosphere, which can convey to sensitives the impression of our character and condition. Wherever the foot touches the ground, the impression of the man is left upon it, so that even the dog, by means of it, can track his master hours after he has passed over the ground. Houses become so imbued with the influence of the people that live in them that sensitive persons can feel that influence as soon as they enter, and if it is unpleasant, they have a feeling of uneasiness, of positive unhappiness, as long as they are subject to it. Dr. Haddock says, frequented rooms store up this mass of human influences. The kitchen borrows the cook's character. The dining room registers the public family life. Sleeping chambers, especially, record the nameless history of undiscovered hearts. The writer is convinced that he has dimly sensed something of the personality of former occupants in various houses where he has lived. It is a common thought that rooms may be pervaded by the presence of absent people at one time familiar there. The atmosphere of a vacated saloon must differ vastly from that of a reputable theater, an art museum, a college, or a church. It is very probable that the mystery surrounding many so-called haunted houses might be dispelled by an inquiry conducted along the lines of the hypotheses of thought radioactivity and the inductive action of thought. In fact, one of the present writers has heard of the so-called spooks being driven away from such houses by means of scientific application of thought power along the lines now under consideration. For evil thought atmospheres may be overcome by means similar to that employed in turning the sunlight into a dark, damp cellar. Ghosts, in at least many cases, are not but stored up accumulations of past thought impressions and vibrations. The evil thought atmosphere of houses of ill repute has been known to linger long after the building has been taken over by a reputable business. Here, also, scientific treatment would have proved efficacious. The thought atmospheres of stores, offices, and business places in general are often quite marked. In many cases they act inductively upon persons entering them for the first time, creating a distinct feeling concerning the character of the place. In cases of this kind it will be found usually that the spirit of the place is practically determined by the characteristic mental states and actions of those in charge of the business in question. The persons constituting the management establish the policy of the concern in accordance with their own ideas and feelings. The policy of a business concern usually is a representation of the character of those who direct and establish that policy. Moreover, that policy, by reason of its effect upon the employees, soon creates an actual spirit of the place, or a huge, composite, thought form built up of the characteristic mental vibrations of those taking part in the business. You have probably met with cases in which the management of a large business house has been changed, either by reason of the business being sold out to new people, or by reason of the owners employing some new man of strong character to take charge of the management of the concern. In such cases there will be noticed almost immediately a change in the thought atmosphere of the place, in some cases a complete change of atmosphere being plainly felt by persons visiting the establishment. The new keynote of policy sets into operation a new set of mental vibrations, an entirely new mental rhythm is established in the place. In the same way changes of management sometimes lower the tone of a business office, store, or bank, instead of raising it. Old patrons will be found complaining that the old place does not feel the same when I enter it. Large office buildings frequently have their characteristic general atmospheres, independent of those of their particular office suites. The influence of a few tenants of strong character, and marked mental tendencies good or bad, will sometimes serve to establish a keynote of the building. Then, according to the law of attraction in the world of thought, which we shall consider later on in this book, other tenants of a similar character are attracted to the building, and before long the place begins to acquire a reputation and a character of its own. We have known office buildings which have attracted to themselves a class of tenants of such an undesirable character that more reputable concerns avoided the place, and persons became suspicious of anyone having suites in it. On the other hand, we have known of office buildings which fairly radiated the vibrations of success, solidity, and reliability. We especially recall the case of a prominent building in a large city in which a small group of active successful men has served to set up such a center of success vibrations, that the whole place became noted for the success of its tenants. If you will talk with persons whose business requires them to visit different large office buildings, they will verify the above statements and will give you many striking illustrations gleaned from their own experiences. In the same way, certain store or bank buildings have acquired a reputation for being lucky, while others have earned the classification of unlucky. There are stores in every city the tenants of which for many years past have been quite successful and have earned money. There are also other stores in which practically everyone who has rented them has met with ill fortune and failure. These facts are familiar to every businessman who has kept his eyes open. In many cases the facts just noted have been attributed to mere coincidence, while by others they have been attributed to some supernatural or occult agency. But, whatever may have been the explanation accepted, it is noticeable that most businessmen will avoid the hoodoo places, and will seek the lucky ones. An understanding of the laws of thought radioactivity and of the inductive action of thought will serve to explain and account for phenomena of the kind just mentioned, and to bring such under the category of natural cause and effect. Moreover, a knowledge of these laws would have served to indicate a method of scientific treatment of the unlucky, hoodoo places, which would have taken the curse off them in a perfectly natural, scientific way. As you have probably already inferred from the foregoing statements, not only do dwelling houses, business houses, office buildings, and public places have thought atmospheres of their own which are felt by those who enter them, but also many villages, towns, cities, and even entire countries have their respective thought atmospheres made up by the composite thoughts and mental states of the individuals forming the inhabitants of the places. In old established communities this is more noticeable, because in such cases time has built up a decided thought character for the place, but even in newer communities the same law is in operation, and its effects are manifested. If you will stop to think for a moment, you will realize that every town or city that you know has its own special character, its own spirit, its own atmosphere, and that each induces its own particular kind of feeling in you when you visit it. Each town or city, like each individual, has its strong points and its weak points, characteristics that you like and those which you do not like, but each is different, each impresses you in a different way from the others. Towns and cities have decided individualities of their own. Their respective characters are built up of the composite thought influences of the past and present, these serving to attract to the place individuals of a similar mental trend, and to drive away from the town those individuals who are not in harmony with the spirit of the place. Persons coming into a strange town or city are usually keenly aware of the change in the thought atmosphere, and often are rendered quite uncomfortable by it. But in time they either adjust themselves to the new conditions by taking on sufficient of the new influences and characteristics to bring them into at least reasonable harmony with their mental environment, or else they find the new conditions unbearable, and are themselves compelled to leave the place. Sometimes, however, when by reason of a rapid change in economic conditions a town or city is subject to a strong influx of new inhabitants, particularly when the latter come rapidly and in considerable number about the same time, then the thought influences of the newcomers may serve to overcome, or at least to neutralize, the old thought atmosphere, and in a short period of time the thought atmosphere of the place has changed. In such cases a person revisiting the place after a short absence is struck by the change, and is apt to remark that a new spirit seems to pervade the place. Often, also, the coming of a few strong individuals, men or women of positive characters and views, will serve to inject a new thought element into the atmosphere of a place, and thus to bring about a perceptible change in its character and composition. As proof of the existence of such characteristics of different towns and cities, you have but to recall the impressions made upon you by the different places you have visited. You will find that in your book of remembered experiences you have a distinct impression concerning each town and city visited by you. You may have even the record of the different impressions produced upon you by different sections of the same city. For instance, you have a strong composite impression concerning New York City as a whole, if you have ever visited that metropolis, and at the same time you will have distinct impressions of various parts of Manhattan as a whole, of Brooklyn, the Bronx, and of Staten Island. Then, again, your impression of Chicago will be entirely different from that of New York City. Each city has its own thought atmosphere which is quite easily felt by you, and which registers itself upon your mind by means of its inductive action. Different from either your impressions of New York and of Chicago will be your impression of Philadelphia. Still different is the atmosphere of Detroit, of Boston, of Pittsburgh, of New Orleans, of Denver, of Kansas City, of St. Louis, and of the other large cities of the country. Going still further west, you will find that the coast has its own unmistakable thought atmosphere, which is readily distinguished from that of the East, Middle West, or Rocky Mountain regions. Moreover, you will detect marked differences between the thought atmospheres of the different coast cities. San Francisco, Los Angeles, Portland, Tacoma, and Seattle, each has its own characteristic atmosphere. Still more marked in their differences are the atmospheres of the older cities, the cities of the Old World. So pronounced are the respective atmospheres of London, Paris, Berlin, Vienna, Rome, Petrograd, Madrid, Budapest, Stockholm, and the rest, that an experienced traveler who had once made a long stay in any of them would recognize the feel of the place were he transported there in his sleep and awakened without being aware of the journey. The atmospheres of the great cities of Asia are quite pronounced, so much so, in fact, that often the traveler who once actually falls under their spell will thereafter, throughout his entire life, feel the East calling him. Australians claim that there is a something about their land which is met with nowhere else in the world, and for which they pine when away from home. And, on the dark side of the page, many travelers have testified concerning the evil spell, the mental miasma. Which hovers over certain parts of the interior of Africa, blighting all who remain under its influence. There is something in the air of places other than the familiar chemical constituents, and that something is perceptible to most persons, and exerts at least some degree of influence upon them. In the hypotheses of thought radioactivity and the inductive action of thought, respectively, we have an explanation of the apparently uncanny and mysterious emanations from, and influences surrounding, many old places of the Earth's history, the scenes of ancient civilizations long since vanished from human sight, which have left their traces upon the sensitive ethereal medium upon which thought registers its vibrations, and from which the latter are reproduced by induction under favorable circumstances. The strange legends concerning old castles, ruins, ancient temples, prehistoric tombs, etc., need not be dismissed as mere fancy, or as idle superstition. There is a perfectly natural, scientific explanation of many such strange beliefs and traditions. There are two great principles of the activity of thought power involved in the phenomena which you have just considered, and of other phenomena which you have not as yet considered. It is necessary that you grasp the essential facts concerning such principles, in order that you may arrive at an intelligent understanding of all such phenomena. These two principles are as follows. 1. The principle of thought-contagion, which manifests in the catching of strong thought influences, in thought epidemics, and mental contagions. 2. The principle of thought attraction, which manifests in the drawing power of thought, whereby strong thought vibrations tend to attract other thought vibrations of the same general character, and, consequently, to attract and draw to a common center different individuals of the same general trend of thought, and to produce and induce many other forms and phases of the attraction existing between thoughts and things, or between ideas and persons. In the next following sections of this book, the two great principles above noted will be considered in further detail. Thought-Contagion. One of the most striking instances of the power of the radioactivity of thought, and of the inductive action of thought, is found in that class of phenomena which has been called thought-contagion, or mental epidemics. As these terms indicate, in this class of phenomena there is a spreading of thought influence and a liability to catch the spirit of the general thought wave which is spreading itself over a group of people, a community, a nation, or even over the civilized world as a whole. In its simplest form, thought contagion is found in cases in which groups or congregations of individuals are moved by a common impulse, the latter being originally imparted by some individuals of strong emotional tendencies in the crowd, and then rapidly spreading from one to another of the crowd until nearly everyone in the group or crowd has caught the feeling and its accompanying impulse. This class of phenomena, in its simplest phases, is illustrated by the rapid spread of emotional excitement among an audience or congregation under the influence of a magnetic orator, preacher, actor, or other spellbinder, as the colloquial term well expresses it. You have seen large audiences swayed by a common emotion under such circumstances, and, perhaps, have yourself come under the influence of the epidemic thought currents. One is often roused to the stage of intense emotion, and experiences the impulse to act thereupon, by words which when seen in cold print seem devoid of any exciting power. In such cases, the orator, actor, or preacher possesses sufficient magnetic force to set things going, and after that the contagion spreads rapidly until finally nearly everyone in the audience is more or less affected. In cases of revival meetings, the influence of thought contagion is quite strongly manifested. The same principle governs what are known as mobs, creating what is known as the mob spirit. The mob, at the beginning, may be made up of the average persons of the community, brought together by curiosity or general interest, and free from vicious intention. Before long, some turbulent spirits in the crowd begin to manifest emotional excitement, and start to arouse a similar feeling in their neighbors. If the conditions are favorable, before long the contagion has spread and the epidemic has assumed alarming proportions. If the impulse and influence be sufficiently strong, the crowd veritably becomes a mob, and in some cases proceeds to commit acts of violence and destruction of which the majority had no thought in the beginning, and of which but few of its members would have been capable under ordinary circumstances. When the influence has passed, most of the individuals are aghast at the acts which they have helped to perpetrate. The following newspaper report of the mental epidemic manifested at one of Paderewski's recitals, several years ago, will illustrate the thought contagion frequently in evidence in audiences, congregations, etc. There is a chatter, a rustling of programs, a waving of fans, a nodding of feathers, a general air of expectancy, and the lights are lowered. A hush. All eyes are turned to a small door leading on to the stage. It is opened. Paderewski enters. A storm of applause greets him, but after it comes a tremulous hush and a prolonged sigh created by the long, deep inhalation of upward of 3,000 women. Paderewski is at the piano. Thousands of eyes watch his every movement through opera glasses and with an intensity painful to observe. He the idol, they the idolaters. Toward the end of the performance the most decorous women seem to abandon themselves to the influence. There are sighs, sobs, the tight clinching of the palms, the bowing of the head. Fervid exclamations, "He is my master," are heard in the feminine mob. Other equally striking examples are afforded by the thought contagion and the mental epidemics manifested at the meetings of the successful evangelist or revivalist. You will at once recall instances within your own experience. Immense crowds are aroused to the highest pitch of excitement. Individuals throw aside their customary reserve and dignity, and indulge in emotional extravagances of speech, demeanor and action. Shouts, moans, and groans are heard. Some persons fall into spasms brought on by overexcitement, others faint or fall into trances. The crowd rushes to the altar to confess its sins, and to seek salvation. The pockets of the crowd are emptied into the collection receptacles, often jewelry is torn off and tossed into the plate. Even the scientific observer, though holding himself well in hand, often feels the surges of emotional contagion, and may even be surprised to feel the tears coursing down his cheek. Though his head remains cool, his heart has been aroused by the heat of the emotional contagion. In the case of the mob, a similar psychological background exists. Cedis describes as follows a crowd being infected by the mob contagion, when the preacher, the politician, the stump orator, the ringleader, the hero, gains the ear of the crowd, an ominous silence sets in, a silence frequently characterized as awful. The crowd is in a state of overstrained expectation, with suspended breath it watches the hero or the interesting, all-absorbing object. Disturbing impressions are excluded, put down, driven away by main force. So great is the silence induced in the fascinated crowd, that very frequently the buzzing of a fly, or even the drop of a pin, can be distinctly heard. All interfering impressions and ideas are inhibited. The crowd is entranced, and rapidly merges into the mob state. Tolstoy, in his War and Peace, pictures the mental condition of a crowd which was rapidly being transformed into an entranced mob. The crowd remained silent, and pressed on one another closer and closer. To bear the pressure of one another, to breathe in this stifling, contagious atmosphere, not to have the power to stir, and to expect something unknown, incomprehensible, and terrible, became intolerable. Those who were in the front, who saw and heard everything that took place, all those stood with eyes full of fright, widely dilated, with open mouths, and straining their whole strength, they kept on their backs the pressure of those behind them. Cedis, in the following striking passages, cleverly pictures the effect of mental suggestion upon an entranced crowd rapidly sinking to the mob state. The suggestion given to the entranced crowd by the master spreads like wildfire. The given suggestion reverberates from individual to individual, gathers strength, and becomes so overwhelming as to drive the crowd into a fury of activity, into a frenzy of excitement. As the suggestions are taken by the mob and executed, the wave of excitement rises higher and higher. Each fulfilled suggestion increases the emotion of the mob in volume and intensity. Each new attack is followed by a more violent paroxysm of furious demoniac frenzy. The mob is like an avalanche. The more it rolls, the more menacing and dangerous it grows. The suggestion is given by the hero, by the ringleader, by the master of the moment, is taken up by the crowd and is reflected and reverberated from man to man, until every soul is dizzied and every person is stunned. In the entranced crowd, in the mob, every one influences and is influenced in his turn, every one suggests and is suggested to, and the surging billow of suggestion swells and rises until it reaches a formidable height. The mob energy grows faster than the increase in numbers. The mob spirit grows and expands with each human increment. Like a cannibal, it feeds on human beings. The mob has a self of its own, the personal self is suppressed, swallowed up by it, so much so that when the latter comes once more to the light of day, it is frequently horrified at the work, the crime that the mob self has committed. Once the mob self is generated, or truer to say, brought to the surface, it possesses a strong attractive power and a great capacity for assimilation. It attracts fresh individuals, breaks down their personal life, and quickly assimilates them. The assimilated individual expresses nothing but the energy suggestion, the will of the entranced crowd. He enters fully into the spirit of the mob. The extreme impulsiveness of the mob self is notorious. No sooner is a suggestion accepted, no matter how criminal, how inhuman it might be, than it is immediately realized, unless another suggestion more in accord with the general nature of suggestions in which the mob itself was trained, interferes and deflects the energy of the mob in another direction. Cases are of record in which individuals who plunged into the midst of an excited mob with the full purpose of counteracting its purposes, were themselves overcome by the contagion and fell in with the actions of the mob, although the latter were directly opposed to their normal feelings, convictions and interests. A Russian writer cites an instance in which a soldier bitterly denounced the mob which was beating to death his old commander, who, he said, had been like a father to him. Being urged to help the man who had befriended him, he rushed into the crowd with that avowed purpose. A few minutes later he was discovered beating the old commander with a club, like the rest of the crowd. Being reproached, he said, "He was indeed like a father to me, but in such a time, when all the rest strike him, why should I keep quiet?" Jews have been caught in anti-Jewish crowds, and vice versa, the individual being carried away by the thought epidemic. Almost incredible instances are recorded concerning the influence of thought contagion leading to the participation of persons in mob movements directed against their own kindred class, sect, or faith. Another form of thought contagion, or of mental epidemics, is the condition of panic or stampede manifested by crowds, communities, and even entire countries at many times in history. There have been many instances of the rapid and wide spread of popular fear of the coming of the end of the world. It would seem that at least once in every generation a panic or craze of this kind breaks out. Someone starts the rumor that the world is coming to an end on such and such a day. The condition of the popular mind being propitious, the rumor is taken up and accepted by many, and before long reaches the degree of thought contagion or mental epidemic. Before the inevitable subsidence, thousands are affected and in many cases deplorable results arise: insanity, suicides through fear, neglect of financial interests, breaking up of families, destruction or disposal of goods and property. All these are incidents of this form of thought contagion. Similar mental epidemics arise from the appearance of comets, accompanied by dire prophecies, the appearances of plagues of various kinds, the rumors of financial calamities about to overtake the country, and similar prophecies or promises of evil. In short, it seems that under certain general psychological conditions, arising from a number of favoring causes, it is possible that a panicky condition, or a general stampede, may be started from the simplest beginnings and by reason of the most irrational ideas. Like a herd of frightened cattle or horses, like a crowd of sheep, like a flock of chickens, the great masses of people catch the contagion, take fright, work themselves into a state of panic, and away they go in a wild stampede, all without valid reasons or sufficient motives. In the same way, strong waves of speculative excitement, gambling crazes, get-rich-quick epidemics, have affected large masses of people. Apparently all at once, great numbers of people will rush to invest their hard-earned money in some wild, fantastic, unbusinesslike scheme which has been widely heralded. Then scores of similar schemes are evolved, like mushrooms, they grow overnight. Persons heretofore careful and prudent throw aside all caution and forethought, and actually beg the promoters of the wild enterprises to accept their money, to let them in the scheme. Then, sooner or later, the bubble bursts, and the excitement dies out at once. After it is all over, the public wonders how it ever could have happened, the people keep on wondering, until history repeats itself as it always does when given sufficient time. As illustrations of the financial crazes or epidemics due to thought contagion or mental epidemics, we cite the following three celebrated instances. 1. The tulip craze of 1634, where the Dutch people experienced an epidemic of belief in the get-rich-quick possibilities of tulip raising. Ordinary industry was suspended, and practically everyone took to raising tulips. Fancy tulips rose in value equal to that of diamonds. They were sold by the grain, or even by more minute weights. People sold their houses and lands, their furniture and their businesses, in order to speculate in tulips. Money poured into Holland from other countries to which the epidemic had spread. In time, a panic succeeded the craze, and the bubble burst, causing the ruin of thousands of persons. 2. The Mississippi Company craze of 1717, in which the thought contagion or mental epidemic reached heights which now seem almost incredible. This craze had its seat in France, where John Law, a shrewd Scotchman, obtained from the Regent of France the exclusive rights for his company to trade on the west bank of the Mississippi River in America. Later, the exclusive privileges were extended to the East Indies and the South Seas. Law announced probable profits of 120%. Thousands of enthusiastic French men of all ranks and classes fought at Law's doors for the privilege of subscribing for shares in his company. The nation indulged in an orgy of gambling, the streets were transformed into trading floors for the sale of stock. The public acted as if it were drunk, the wildest excesses were manifested. Finally the bubble burst, thousands of persons had lost their all, and many were reduced to actual poverty. 3. The South Sea Bubble, of 1720, in which the English public was subjected to a severe attack of thought contagion, or mental epidemic. The South Sea Company, by means of false rumors, started the craze. The rumors spread, gaining in size and strength as they traveled. Soon it was believed that the investment of £100 would bring a sure return of many hundreds of pounds per annum. People abandoned their ordinary occupations, and became speculators in shares of stock. Imitation schemes were born, and people fought to trade in their shares. The whole country was infected with the get-rich-quick virus. The most absurd schemes were evolved, and nothing seemed too silly to receive popular support. The shares of the South Sea Company finally reached the point of 1,000% increase. Finally, the bubble was pricked, stocks fell, a panic ensued, thousands were utterly ruined financially. These three great cases of thought contagion, or mental epidemics, serve to illustrate the general principles underlying all similar cases. In this country and in Europe there have been other cases of financial crazes of a similar character which have occurred during the past century. Every person of middle age will readily recall instances of this kind, of greater or less severity. Cedis says of this class of cases, the course of speculation epidemics is to rise to the highest point of heavenly bliss, and then to fall to the lowest depth of misery, to pass from a state of acute maniacal exaltation to a state of still more acute melancholic depression. Great waves of religious revival epidemics have at times rolled over countries, affecting many thousands, and in many cases causing deplorable results. In America, the earlier part of the 19th century was remarkable for such cases. Several great revival epidemics flourished in this country in the first half of that century. In 1800, in 1815, and again in 1832, the great American revivals flourished. In many cases the public, especially in remote districts, literally went mad. Hysteria was deemed the hallmark of salvation, and the saner minds in the ministry were rejected by the masses who preferred to follow the lead of the sensationalists. Ordinarily sober and sane persons attending the meetings acted like wild dervishes, convulsions, trances, strange fits, barking like dogs, mewing like cats, neighing like horses. These were the signs of conversion, according to the insane standards adopted. In some cases, there began a search for spiritual mates, and soon the sanctified were living with affinities, with the full consent of their lawful mates. The craze passed in time, leaving behind it a trail of physical and mental wrecks, and, in some instances, moral wrecks as well. In this class of mental epidemics may also be placed the great Millwright craze of 1840, arising from the predictions of one William Miller that the coming of the Lord was at hand, and the end of the world was about to occur. The doctrine was widely spread by Miller and his disciples, and before long the country went wild with it. Finally, an exact date, year, month, day, and hour, was announced, in which the Son of Man will come with power and great glory. Then came the gift of tongues and the gift of prophecy to the faithful. Men and women forsook their work and their homes, and indulged in orgies of religious hysteria. In many cases families were forsaken and abandoned. Nights were passed in exhortations and prayers. It is recorded that night was rendered hideous by their screams. Property was given away freely or else abandoned. White ascension robes were prepared by the faithful for the great day. The day came, the faithful waited, some even ascending trees in order to be the first to ascend to heaven. Nothing happened. Great discouragement was manifested by the many who were ruined. A mistake in dates was announced, and a new date fixed. Many accepted this change, and the program was repeated. In 1844 the second prediction failed, and the craze was over, leaving behind the usual trail of wrecked minds and bodies. Students of history are familiar with the celebrated mental epidemics of older times. The Crusades epidemic carried men and women, and finally even young children, toward the Holy Land in order to rescue the Holy Sepulchre. Thousands upon thousands died on the journey, others were captured and sold as slaves. The final crusade was composed entirely of young children, boys and girls, many of whom met with terrible fates. Then came the flagellant craze, in which thousands of men and women, often almost or entirely nude, marched the streets, scourging themselves with leather thongs until the blood flowed freely. Then came the dancing mania, in which men and women, boys and girls, danced the streets in an ecstatic mental state. Then came the several Messiah epidemics among the Jews, in which the wildest excitement prevailed and almost insane excesses were manifested. Then came the successive waves of witchcraft crazes, in which many thousands of innocent persons were adjudged to be witches or possessed of the devil, and accordingly hanged or burned at the stake. The story is a pitiful one. When reason forsakes her throne, chaos reigns. With the increase of public knowledge, and the spread of popular education, the character of these mental epidemics has changed, but the principle remains the same. One needs but to consider the many crazes and mental epidemics occurring during the period of his own experience in order to appreciate the fact that the principle is still operative. Even within the past 25 years the world has experienced many cases of religious epidemics, financial crazes, the rise and fall of many strange fads, isms, and ologies. Strange crazes for extreme fashions in dress, in amusements, etc., are continually having their rise, their brief period of popularity, and their speedy decline. To read a book written 20 years ago, is to realize how many now forgotten crazes were flourishing at that time. Students of those of our own times will have a similar experience of amused wonder, 20 years hence. In times of great political excitement, particularly during presidential campaigns in this country, these great waves of thought contagion pass over the land, causing mental epidemics of great power. A few days after election, people are wondering what it was all about. The sinking of the Maine, in 1898, produced a mental contagion which extended all over the United States, and thus made inevitable the war with Spain which followed a few months later. In 1915, the sinking of the Lusitania aroused a great wave of thought contagion in America, and war at that time was almost caused. Its effects, temporarily held back, were manifested 2 years later when similar occurrences aroused the popular feeling and caused the entry of the United States into the Great World War. The Great World War, itself, owed its rapid spread and its wide extension in no small measure to thought contagion. Persons all over the world are now looking back, in a dazed condition, to the terrible happenings of that recent period of the world's history, and are wondering how they possibly could have occurred in this stage of civilization. But all thought contagion is not of such a marked or violent character as indicated by the illustrative cases which we have cited. As we have told you in our consideration of thought atmospheres, the atmospheres of places, of cities, towns, villages, districts, houses, stores, offices, etc., are largely due to thought contagion. The thought keynote sounded by strong authoritative individuals in a community, or in a place of business, a church, or an office, communicates itself to those dwelling in the place or working there, then begins a process of action and reaction, a mutual contagion, which continues until a mental equilibrium is secured, and the thought atmosphere of the places becomes set. The mental keynote of an audience, a congregation, a mass meeting, etc., is reached in the same way. The principle remains the same, though its manifestations have a wide range of different expressions. You must not fall into the error of supposing that all thought contagion is harmful, evil, or detrimental, or that every mental epidemic is a bad one. On the contrary, good thoughts are catching as well as are bad ones. The influence of thought environments of the right kind is most powerful, and has helped to reform many a person and to set him on the right path. One finds it very much easier to pursue the right path of living when he is surrounded by the proper mental atmosphere, just as the opposite kind of mental atmosphere makes right living much harder for him. This fact is instinctively understood by those working for human betterment, even though they may not understand the true causes underlying what they call environmental conditions. The right kind of environment is the place in which the proper kinds of thought vibrations are habitually manifested, and the appropriate kind of mental atmosphere maintained. An understanding of the true causes of environmental influence will serve to clear up many apparent mysteries which attract the attention of all students of the subject. Neither should you fall into the error of supposing that you are at the mercy of every wave of thought contagion, of every mental epidemic, that comes in your direction. The more that you understand the nature of thought contagion and mental epidemics, the less liable will you be to be affected, or infected, by those of an undesirable nature. Forewarned, forearmed, says the old proverb, and it is true in this case. When you know the symptoms, you may deliberately guard against the infection by determinately turning your thoughts and attention in the opposite direction, and by bringing your reason into action. Finally, you may realize so fully the fact that the I am I is the master, that you may erect a defensive barrier against all thought influences of a detrimental or harmful character, while opening yourself to the inflow of helpful, positive, advantageous thought influences. In the later sections of this book these matters will be gone into in further detail. In conclusion, let us remind you that, in knowledge there is power, in this matter of thought contagion and influences. A knowledge of the facts is in itself a strong weapon of defense. Again, let us assure you that there is nothing to fear in the case. That is, there is nothing to fear but fear, for fear is the great negative, depressing, weakening mental state. Fear thought invites undesirable mental currents and contagion, fearlessness repels them. Fearlessness is positive, fear thought is negative, and the positives always overcome the negatives. The individual who realizes in consciousness the real nature of his I am I, and who recognizes its impregnable position, may stand on the solid rock of his own selfhood, which is grounded on the base of all power, and from that point may defy the winds of negative thought influences, and the waves of popular mental epidemics which sweep away the resting places of those who have built upon the sands of the superficial personality. Your real self is a mighty fortress, of the gates of which you alone hold the key. Nothing can enter its walls, unless you give it permission. Thought attraction. The second great principle of the activity of thought power, which is involved in the manifestation of the radioactivity of thought and the inductive action of thought, is that known as the attractive power of thought, or the drawing power of the mind. In the operation of this principle of thought power, the thought vibrations manifest a strong attractive force, by means of which they attract or draw to themselves other thought vibrations of a similar character. The same principle operates in the direction of drawing or attracting to each other, or to a common center, different individuals of the same general trend of thought. It also tends to produce and induce many other forms and phases of attraction between thoughts and things, ideas and persons. Thought attraction plays the same part in the world of thoughts that gravitation plays in the world of matter. Gravitation operates in the direction of drawing toward each other the particles and masses of material substance. Thought attraction operates in the direction of drawing together those thought currents, thought waves, thought vibrations, etc., which are of the same or a similar nature. Thought attraction operates along the lines of the general rule that, like attracts like, and thoughts manifest a tendency which is well expressed by the familiar adage, birds of a feather flock together. In short, thoughts have been discovered to manifest a strong tendency to enter into close relations with other thoughts of a similar character, and to attract to themselves these similar thoughts, while, at the same time, they themselves are attracted by the latter. A mutual attraction exists between thoughts of the same general character. There is something like a chemical affinity existing between them, and also something like a chemical repulsion between thoughts of opposite characters. As a consequence, the person who in a strong degree manifests definite thoughts of a certain character sets into operation the power of thought attraction, and thereby draws and attracts to himself the thought vibrations, thought waves, or thought currents of other persons whose thoughts closely resemble his own. In short, such a person draws from the great mental atmosphere, surrounding him on all sides, the active energy of those thought vibrations which are in harmony with his own, and at the same time he repels from his mental atmosphere those thought vibrations which are inharmonious with his own. This, as you will readily see, applies not only to desirable and advantageous thoughts and mental states, but also to those which are undesirable and disadvantageous. You have frequently experienced the working of this mental principle in your own mental states. You have dropped into a mood of depression and gloom, everything looks blue to you, and nothing seems worthwhile. The cause may be physical, or it may be purely mental, it matters not, so far as the effects upon other thought vibrations are concerned. Before long, you will feel as if a deep cloud of depression were settling upon you, shutting out the rays of the sun, and enveloping you in a mental atmosphere of gloom, pessimism, and discouragement. You have attracted toward yourself the thought vibrations of other persons which are in harmony with your own. This, in turn, will result in a still more powerful attractive force being set into operation in the same direction, and you will go from bad to worse in the matter of gloom and depression. Finally, however, the protective forces of your being will cause a swing of the pendulum in the other direction, and you will experience temporary relief. But if you persist in encouraging gloomy thoughts, and the consequent attraction of similar thought vibrations, you may eventually reach a state of chronic depression and gloom, into which the sunlight of cheerfulness is almost unable to penetrate. Your only hope, in such case, is deliberately to set into operation thoughts of an opposite character, thoughts of cheerfulness, hope, and encouragement, which will attract other thoughts of a like nature, and will thus counteract and neutralize the negative, depressing mental states which have afflicted you. In the same way, though in the opposite direction, you will find that if you will strive to secure and to maintain the characteristic mental state expressed by the words, bright, cheerful, and happy, you will attract to yourself similar bright, cheerful, and happy thought vibrations, thought waves, thought currents. You will feel their uplifting influence almost at once, and will experience the delight and advantage of a mental atmosphere of this kind. Not only will you attract these positive, inspiring thoughts, but you will also repel the negative, dispiriting thought influences in the great mental atmosphere surrounding you. Thoughts of hate, anger, envy, and jealousy tend to attract to themselves the thoughts of others of the same kind, and these, in turn, induce a still higher degree of these objectionable mental states in your own mind. You sometimes bring upon yourself veritable whirlwinds of hate thoughts by sending forth strong thought vibrations of that kind. The old saying that, curses, like chickens, come home to roost, has a practical realization in cases such as we have just mentioned. In the processes of thought power, your mental loans are returned, with compound interest, the payment being made in the same kind of mental coin, good or bad, which you have paid out. If even from only a purely selfish point of view, it pays to send out the right kind of thoughts. Avoid sending out thoughts of a character which you would not like to have returned to you in kind, with interest. On the other hand, so that you may reap, sow that which you hope to reap, in the field of thought. From what has been said, you will see that the inductive action of thought is largely modified and influenced by the attractive power of thought. The degree of the liability to induction, contagion, or thought influence of any kind, depends largely upon the character of one's own thoughts. In other words, one is far more likely to be affected and influenced by thought vibrations, currents, waves, or atmospheres in harmony with the character of his own thoughts, than by those not in harmony therewith. In fact, such a definite ratio exists between thought induction and thought attraction that an exact formula might be worked out by a competent mathematician familiar with the data. Another important and interesting point should be noted in your consideration of the subject of thought attraction. We have made reference to the fact that not only do you attract thought vibrations, thought waves, thought currents, thought atmospheres, etc., of a harmonious character, and to which your thoughts have a natural affinity, but that you also attract to yourself, by the power of thought attraction, other persons whose thoughts have an affinity in harmony with your own. In the same way you attract to yourself, and are attracted by, other persons whose interests run along the same general lines as your own. You draw to yourself the persons who may be necessary for the successful carrying out of the plans and purposes, the desires and ambitions, which fill your thoughts most of the time, and, in the same way, you are drawn toward those into whose plans and purposes you are fitted to play an important part. In short, each person tends to attract toward himself those other persons whom he needs in order to materialize his ideals and to express his desires, provided that he wants hard enough and that the other persons are in harmonious affinity with his plans and purposes. According to this principle, certain towns and cities of a strong mental character tend to draw to themselves persons from all over the country, and even from other countries, whose general mental natures are in harmonious affinity with those of the place. In the same way, many individuals of certain general mental or emotional characteristics are almost irresistibly attracted by and drawn to certain towns and cities with the general mental character of which they are in harmonious affinity. You have often seen cases in which persons could not keep away from certain towns, cities, or parts of the country for which they were naturally fitted by reason of their mental characteristics. This is one of the reasons why particular places rapidly take on certain mental characteristics, once the process of thought attraction and thought induction have been started. There are other, and more subtle, phases of the operation of thought attraction which must be noted here, although they involve the activities of certain powers of the mind, and of nature, which are but little understood by the great masses of persons. We have reference to the fact that by thought attraction not only other thoughts, not only other persons, are attracted, but that also the conditions, environment, and circumstances necessary for the effective expression and manifestation of one's thoughts are often brought into actual relation to him. They can scarcely be said to have been attracted to him, rather does it seem that he is attracted to and by them. There evidently is some sort of correlation set up between these things and one's thoughts, and subtle natural forces are called into operation in order that there may be a coordination of the person, the time, the place, the conditions, the opportunity, required for the expression and materialization of the thought. One of the present writers, about 20 years ago, wrote the following statement concerning the general operations of the laws of thought attraction. They serve equally well to express the general idea today, even in the light of the investigations which have been made along the same lines during that period of time. We take the liberty of quoting the statement in full, believing that it will possess a special interest to the readers of the present book. The statement in question is as follows. Your thoughts place you in connection with the outside world and its forces, and you attract and repel people and things by the character of thought held. You and they are attracted to each other, because your thoughts are pitched on the same key. You are in close touch with all other parts of the whole, but attract to yourself only such of the parts which correspond in kind with your mental attitude. If you think success, you will find that you have started into operation the forces that are conducive to your success, and, from time to time, if you maintain the same mental attitude, other things will fall into line as they are needed, and will aid you in your efforts. Things will seem to come your way in a most astounding manner, and opportunities will arise, which if taken advantage of, will ensure to you success. You will find that new thoughts will come into your mind which should be taken advantage of. You will meet with persons who will help you in many ways by suggestions, ideas, and active help. Of course, the work which you must do yourself will not be performed for you by others, but the law will continually help and assist you. It will bring opportunities and chances to your door, but you will have to take them in. It will lead you up to the doors opening into advancement, but you will have to open the doors yourself. It will undertake what will seem to be roundabout roads to get to a thing, but you will arrive at your journey's end, no matter how winding may be the road. Sometimes it will take you far past the point at which you thought you were aiming, and, as you go past, you will smile when you recall that this point on the road, which now seems so unimportant, seemed a little further back to be your destination, your reason for making the trip. Sometimes, the thing which seems to represent all that is worth having, and which inspires you to make the effort, will have lost all interest for you when you near it. You will make no effort to grasp it as you pass, but will move on past it, swept forward by the tremendous forces which you have, perhaps unwittingly, set into operation. In other books of this series we have considered the effect of desire upon the degree of the attractive power of thoughts. We have likewise considered the important part played by confident expectation, faith, and hope, upon the tendency of thoughts to express themselves in action and to materialize themselves, in which processes thought attraction is involved. It is sufficient here merely to mention the fact that desire animates and energizes the attractive power of thoughts, and that confident expectation, hope, and faith greatly inspire and increase the drawing power of thought. We also wish to call your attention at this point to the fact that you not only attract and draw to yourself the thoughts, things, persons, and conditions representing your wishes and desires, the things you like, in short, but that you also attract and draw to yourself, under certain conditions, the things which are the subject of your fears. Fear thought often exerts a powerful attractive force, in the wrong direction. This because the things you fear are held in mind by you often to a marked degree. You think about them, and roll them over and over in your mind. You let your mind dwell upon them, often to the exclusion of the thoughts of the things you hope for, desire, and ardently wish. Your very fear of a thing is, in a way, at least a partial belief that it will come to you, a form of confident expectation. You hold the thoughts of the feared thing in your mind, you form mental pictures of it in your imagination, you dramatize it, as it were. This being the fact, is it any wonder that fear thought attracts and draws to you often the very things which you have feared? The things I have feared have come upon me. The essential principle underlying the manifestation of thought attraction seems to be as follows: all thought seeks to express itself in action, all thought seeks to materialize itself in objective form. Therefore, the thoughts strongly held in your mind, and the mental pictures held in the imagination, tending to express and manifest themselves, attract and draw to you other thoughts, persons, things, conditions, and circumstances of a kind and character likely to bring about and effect such expression and materialization, and also operate so as to direct you toward the persons and things likely to effect the same ends. This rule holds good even when you do not desire the particular things, but on the contrary entertain such a lively fear toward them that they are constantly in your mind. The logical rule, therefore, is, hold the thoughts and ideas, and the mental pictures of those things which you wish to be expressed and materialized in objective form. Do not dwell upon the opposite kinds of thoughts, and, above all, do not allow fear thought to master you. Construct your own mental patterns and molds, your outlines and diagrams, and never allow fear thought to perform this work for you. Thought waves and forms. Investigators and students of the phenomena of thought power have long been aware that the particular thought vibrations emitted by the individual, as well as the combined thought vibrations of a number of individuals, travel through space in the same general form as that assumed by magnetic force or electrical energy. That is to say, there exist thought waves, thought currents and thought forms, i.e., mass thought vibrations which have assumed a certain form, and acquired a certain density, which are composed of thought vibrations emitted by the individual or individuals. These thought waves, thought currents and thought forms are known to exist, even though they are not visible to the normal vision. They are recognized as present and active by reason of the perception of their effects and results. From such observation much also has been learned concerning their activities and general character. In short, they are known by their works, just as are the waves, currents, and general forms of electrical or magnetic energy, including those phases involved in wireless transmission. It is not always necessary actually to see a thing in order to know that it exists and is active. Nature's strongest forces are often the finest and most subtle, imperceptible to the normal sight, though usually capable of being registered by instruments and apparatus, and of being recognized through their effects and induced results. You never actually saw electricity, nor magnetism, yet you do not doubt their existence nor their power, for you have experienced the results and effects of their activity. The existence of thought waves, thought currents and thought forms is recognized and accepted in the same way. But, from an entirely different source there comes a great mass of evidence tending to corroborate and support the scientific discoveries and hypotheses concerning the above-stated manifestations of thought power. We allude to the great body of teaching generally known as occult, particularly that form of such teachings which has long existed among the Oriental races. We may also say that similar evidence is furnished by certain investigators of psychical research phenomena, the reports of whom agree with those of the Oriental occultists, and, like the latter, are found to indicate the existence of certain laws or principles of activity which independent investigation has discovered to govern the phenomena of thought power along the lines which we are now considering. In short, both the ancient and modern occultists and the psychic researchers hold that in certain exceptional cases, by means of the ordinary faculty of sight developed to a supernormal degree, or else by means of an astral, or psychic, faculty of vision, the thought atmospheres, the thought vibrations, the thought waves and thought currents of the individual may be sensed and perceived by the person possessing the supernormal or psychic or astral vision. The occult teachings furnish an extended series of reports of observations of the phenomena of thought power made in this way. Now, while in this book we have no intention of urging the adoption of these occult or psychic reports, nor are we conducting propaganda work concerning such teachings or doctrines, nevertheless we feel that in view of the fact that the ordinary observations of thought waves, thought currents and thought forms show that these act as if these occult or psychic reports were true, as if such laws and principles of action were operative in the phenomena mentioned, we are called upon to direct your attention to the same in this book. Whether you either accept or reject these reports, we feel that in view of the fact that these thought phenomena act as if such laws and principles are operative, you will find it convenient and interesting to employ them as at least symbolic or poetical illustrations of the workings of thought power in the case of the phenomena in question. We offer them, therefore, with this understanding between us, viz., that you will accept them either as literally correct, or else as merely symbolic or poetical illustrations of certain real activities, or that, suspending judgment in the case, you will maintain an open mind concerning them. In any event, the examination of the reports will prove interesting and instructive. Thought colors. In the first place, the occult teachings inform us that each general class of emotional or thought states has its own color, tint, or hue, which is perceived in thought atmospheres, thought waves, thought currents, or thought forms. Thus, blue indicates religious or spiritual emotions or thoughts, the lighter tints indicating the higher forms of spirituality, yellow indicates feelings and thoughts of an intellectual nature, the lighter tints marking the highest phases of these mental states, orange indicates intellectual ambition or pride, brown indicates greed, avarice, red indicates the elemental or animal passions, and the thoughts arising from them, particularly those concerned with anger, strife and sensuality, crimson indicates the higher forms of affection or love, the very highest phases being marked by a beautiful rose color. Green indicates deceit, trickery, slyness, its clear tints denoting diplomacy, tact, politeness, suavity, while a dirty, dull shade indicates envy, jealousy and disloyalty, gray indicates gloom and depression, certain shades denoting forms of selfishness, while a pallid tint denotes fear, black indicates hate, revenge, malice, destructiveness, and its presence serves to darken the shades of the other colors with which it is often blended. White indicates spirituality, in its highest forms and phases, or perhaps something higher than that to which we usually apply that term, and its presence serves to lighten the tints of the other colors with which it is often blended. There is an almost infinite possibility of blending, combination, shading, tinting and arrangement of these colors, but the above will serve to indicate the general report and teaching on the subject. Thought auras. The occult teachings inform us that each and every person has his or her aura, or egg-shaped thought atmosphere, surrounding the body, and extending some 3 feet or more from it, gradually shading into faintness at its extreme limits. This aura, we are informed, differs in color according to the characteristic thoughts and emotional states of the person, the above stated scale of colors determining the shade, hue, or blending. The thought atmosphere of a person consists of this aura together with its more distant and extended radiations, all, however, being colored according to its general character. The thought atmosphere of places. The thought atmospheres of churches, business establishments, homes, offices, prisons, hospitals and similar places, are held by the occultists to be colored according to the general character of the thoughts and mental states of those who inhabit them, or who have previously given them their mental color. Churches are said to vary materially in their blue coloring, some being of a beautiful clear light blue, while others manifest an ugly, dark, dull purplish color. Theaters are said also to vary greatly in color, tints, shades and hues. Business houses and offices are colored according to their nature. Prisons have a depressing and repulsive coloring. Houses of ill repute have a ugly, low, repulsive shading and coloring so dense that it seems that it must be seen by the normal vision. And so on, each place having its appropriate coloring, its thought atmosphere usually extending for some little distance around it, forming something like an aura, in some cases the thought atmosphere extending quite a distance from the place, and tending to color the whole neighborhood. Thought waves and thought currents. The occult teachings also inform us that there are waves, great and small, composed of thought vibrations of individuals, which often travel great distances from their source. Great currents or streams of thought vibrations also flow in all directions through space, often reaching points very far distant from their starting places. These waves, currents, or streams of thought vibrations all are colored and tinted according to the nature and character of the mental states represented by their vibrations. Some of them seem like rapidly moving streams, with well-defined boundaries, and of great comparative consistency and firmness. Others resemble great clouds of mist or fog, illuminated by their coloring, of course, loosely organized and of but slight consistency, which drift slowly along, changing shape, and apparently lacking in definite direction, acting in every way like their physical counterparts just mentioned. Some of these clouds are light and fleecy, while others are murky, dark and ugly, like great bodies of dark smoke. Thought whirlpools and swirlpools. The occult teachings also inform us that there are great whirlpools often set up in these mental currents or streams, which eventually gain terrific power, and which extend their influences over great areas of space. These whirling vortices of thought vibrations are of two general classes, which for the purpose of distinction may be called whirlpools and swirlpools, respectively. The whirlpool maintains a rotary movement toward a common center, ever drawing to that center the material which is affected by it. The swirlpool also maintains a rotary movement, but away from the common center, ever widening its circumference, and ever seeking to spread its influence over a larger area. The whirlpool acts to draw to its central point all things over which it is able to exert its influence. The swirlpool acts to spread its circle of influence, and to disseminate its contagious influence. These whirlpools and swirlpools of thought vibrations affect and influence only those in whom they can set up similar vibrations by means of inductive action, as we have explained to you. Those immune to these vibrations are not influenced by their drawing or driving power. The general principles of thought attraction, which we have described to you, apply in these cases as well as in the case of every form or phase of the influence of thought power. You should also remember that these whirlpools and swirlpools are not necessarily evil or disadvantageous. On the contrary, they are often composed of the very best kind of thought vibrations representing the most desirable mental states. All great movements, religious, moral, political, educational, set into being and activity great whirlpools and swirlpools such as we have just described. On the other hand, the contagion of mental epidemics or crazes, popular excitement, partisanship, or crowd psychology, in general, is most often transmitted in just this form. These whirlpools and swirlpools, likewise, exist in much smaller form, and exert a comparatively small influence. Every individual or group of individuals seeking to draw other persons to a certain central point or purpose, unconsciously sets into operation one of the smaller whirlpools. Likewise, an individual or a group of individuals seeking to spread some doctrine, teaching, theory, belief, or state of opinion, unconsciously sets into operation one of these smaller swirlpools. The same general principles and laws govern large and small alike. If you understand the general principle, you understand the workings of all of the phenomena governed by that principle. Thought forms. The occult teachings also inform us that in addition to their manifestation as thought waves, thought streams, and thought currents, the thought vibrations of the individual sometimes assume the condition known to us as thought forms, of which there are many varieties and kinds. These thought forms are really detached portions of the aura of the individual, which are thrown off by him by the intensity of his thought, or by the excitement of his emotions, or, in some few cases, by the deliberate will of the person who has acquired an understanding of the occult methods. The aura does not always maintain its definite outlines, and its essential integrity of substance. Instead, on certain occasions it is set into what may be called a violent storm, in which whirlpools and swirlpools are manifested, and during which portions of the auric substance are thrown off into space, sometimes traveling long distances. The following statement by a writer upon occult subjects will serve to picture this condition. The writer says, "The human aura is not always in a state of calm phosphorescence, however. On the contrary, it sometimes manifests great flames, like those of a fiery furnace, which shoot forth in great tongues, and dart forth suddenly in certain directions toward the objects attracting them. Under great emotional excitement the auric flame moves around in swift circling whirlpools, or else swirls away from a center. Again, it seems to throw forth tiny glistening sparks of astral vibrations, some of which travel for great distances." The occultists inform us that thought forms are specialized groupings of astral substance, crystallized by the strong thought impulses or vibrations of the person thinking or manifesting strong emotional excitement. They are generated in the aura of the person, in the first place, but are then thrown off or emitted from the atmosphere of the individual, and are sent off into space. A thought form is really but a strongly manifested thought or feeling which has taken form in the astral substance. Its power and duration depend upon the degree of force of the thought or feeling manifesting it. The occult writer whom we have just quoted gives us the following information concerning the appearance and action of the thought forms so generated and set forth from the aura. These thought forms differ very materially from one another in form and general appearance. The most common form is that of a tiny series of waves, similar to those caused by the dropping of a pebble in a pond of water. Sometimes the thought form takes on the appearance of a whirlpool, rotating around a center, and moving through space as well. Another form is like that of the pinwheel fireworks, swirling away from its center as it moves through space. Still another form is that of a whirling ring, like that emitted from a smokestack of a locomotive, or the mouth of a smoker, the familiar ring of the smoker. Others have the form and appearance of semiluminous globes, glowing like a giant opal. Other thought forms are emitted in jet-like streams, like steam puffed out from a teakettle. Again, one will appear as a series of short puffs of steam-like appearance. Again, one will twist along like an eel or a snake. Another will twist its way like a corkscrew. At other times, a thought form will appear as a bomb or series of bombs projected from the aura of the thinker. Sometimes, in the case of a vigorous thinker or speaker, these thought form bombs will be seen to explode when they reach the aura of the person addressed or thought of. Other forms appear like nebulous things resembling an octopus, whose twining tentacles twist around the person to whom they are directed. Each thought form bears the same color that it possessed when generated in the aura of the person creating it, though the colors seem to fade in time. Many of them glow with a dull phosphorescence, instead of bright coloring. The atmosphere of every person, and every place, is filled with various thought forms emanated from the person, or persons who inhabit the place. Each building has its own distinctive thought forms, which permeate its mental atmosphere, and which are clearly discernible by trained psychic vision. The same occultist, in a description of a journey in the astral, addresses the following words to the person who is supposed to be sensing on the astral plane. We reproduce his words merely because they create an interesting picture of what the occultists claim may be perceived by supernormal psychic vision, not with the intention of supporting the statements contained therein, nor of claiming them to represent actual facts. The occultist says, "Notice that beautiful spiritual blue around that woman's head. And see that ugly muddy red around that man passing her. Here comes an intellectual giant, see that beautiful golden yellow around his head, like a nimbus. But I don't exactly like that shade of red about his body, and there is too marked an absence of blue in his aura. He lacks harmonious development. Do you notice those great clouds of semiluminous substance which are slowly floating along? Notice how the colors vary in them. Those are clouds of thought vibrations, representing the composite thought of a multitude of people. Also notice how each body of thought is drawing to itself little fragments of similar thought forms and energy. You see here the tendency of thought forms to attract others of their kind, how like the proverbial birds of a feather, they flock together, how thoughts come home, bringing their friends with them, how each man creates his own thought atmosphere. Speaking of atmospheres, do you notice that each shop we pass has its own peculiar thought atmosphere? If you look into the houses on either side of the street, you will see that the same thing is true of them. The very street itself has its own atmosphere, created by the composite thought of those inhabiting and frequenting it. No. Do not pass down that side street, its astral atmosphere is too depressing, and its colors too horrible and disgusting for you to witness just now. You might get discouraged and fly back to your normal plane for relief. Look at those thought forms flying through the thought atmosphere. What a variety of form and coloring. Some most beautiful, the majority quite neutral in tint, and, occasionally, a fierce, fiery one tearing its way toward its mark. Observe those whirling and swirling thought forms as they are thrown off from that business house. Across the street, notice that great octopus monster of a thought form, with its great tentacles striving to wind around persons and to draw them into that flashy dance hall and dram shop, a devilish monster which we would do well to destroy. Turn your concentrated thought upon it, and will it out of existence. There, that's the right way, watch it sicken and shrivel. But, alas! More of its kind will come forth from that place. By reference to the above stated teachings of the occultists, ancient and modern, you will see that the occult teachers agree almost, if not indeed wholly, with the hypotheses of the modern investigators of the phenomena of thought power. The occultists, however, claim to have obtained their information by means of psychic or astral vision in which they have actually perceived what they describe, while the modern investigators, on the contrary, make no such claims of actual sensing, but have built their hypotheses entirely from actual observations and experiments concerning the results and effects of the forces in question. So far, it should be noted, the modern investigators have practically corroborated the statements of the ancient occultists, this, certainly, so far as is concerned the actual operation of these forces in the form of thought atmospheres, thought contagion, thought waves, thought currents, thought streams, and thought forms. The modern investigators, however, have advanced no positive statements concerning the colors, or astral tints, which the occultists emphatically assert to exist and to be perceptible to supernormal or psychic vision. Inasmuch, however, as the physical colors which we perceive by ordinary vision are held by scientists to be entirely due to particular rates of vibration of light waves, it is not unreasonable to suppose that thought vibrations of different and higher rates might cause the appearance of color, tints, hues, and shades to a vision capable of perceiving or registering them. This, however, is apart from the general subject of this book, and is here referred to merely because of its general interest. Of more practical importance to us is the discovery that the occultists agree with the modern investigators in the fact that thought-contagion and thought-induction depend quite materially upon, 1. Similarity of thought states between the external thought vibrations and those of the person influenced, and 2. The degree of fear thought or confident expectation of any kind, on the part of the person influenced. Moreover, both classes of teachers and investigators hold that positive, desirable thought states are more powerful in their influence than are the negative, undesirable ones, and serve to neutralize or even to dissolve the latter, a fact which lies at the bottom of all systems or methods of treating thought atmospheres or conditions on the part of mental scientists and others of similar schools. Remember, always that sunlight always drives away darkness. The most effective way of dispelling darkness is to turn on the light. By keeping your own mental keynote properly pitched, you not only are immune to the thought vibrations of the lower order, but also are able to neutralize or to dissolve these by the power of your own thought. Surely a comforting and satisfying fact, is it not? Rules of Thought Induction. The student of the subject of thought power, when he begins to realize the fact that thoughts are radioactive and that they possess inductive power, usually finds himself wondering why all persons, at all times, are not completely overcome by the effect of the thought influences surrounding and exerting their power upon them. He marvels at the fact that anyone can escape the thought induction of the thought atmosphere, but his observation and common sense informs him that most persons seem to be comparatively free from such influences, except in exceptional cases and under unusual conditions. This reflection brings the student to the point where he seeks for, and finds, certain general rules governing the phenomena of thought induction. These general rules we shall now present to you. 1. Protective immunity. Nature operates in the direction of protecting living creatures from influences threatening them injury. So far as is possible, she interposes a protective shield between the creature and the adverse influence. Nature, finding the creature persistently threatened by influences which have proved themselves to be dangerous to the welfare of the species or class to which the creature belongs, begins to build up and establish what is called the protective immunity of the creature to that particular influence. By reason of this natural tendency, the human race is now immune from certain diseases which formerly seriously threatened it. Each generation acquires an additional degree of this immunity. A leading reference work says, immunity may be described as the state or condition of an individual who is resistant or non-susceptible to a particular infection. There is no such thing as absolute immunity. While animals or individuals may seem under natural conditions to be immune to certain diseases, yet when they are placed in an unfavorable environment, or when the natural vigor is lowered by climate or insufficient food, they succumb to diseases to which they are ordinarily immune. In the same way, nature operates in the direction of protecting us from the perception or consciousness of certain sounds, sights, smells, and other sensations, which serve no useful purpose to us but which would serve to distract our attention from more useful reports of the senses. For instance, we are conscious of but a very small percentage of the things which our eyes see on the streets of a busy city. Our ears receive a multitude of sounds which our consciousness fails to register. We become so accustomed to familiar odors that we fail to perceive them. And, in a like manner, we fail to register the greater portion of the thought vibrations which are beating upon us from all sides, at all times. Were it not so, we would never be able to think at all on our own account, or to have a mind of our own. It is only the exceptional, not the ordinary, thought influences which reach us, and by self-training we may still further limit these exceptional influences. In fact, it may be stated as a general principle that we are strongly affected by thought induction proceeding from the radioactive thought of others only when our natural immunity to these is lacking, or when it is overbalanced by certain strong attractive powers in our own minds. These conditions arise, for the most part, from some of the following causes, viz. Rules of thought induction. 1. General lack of resistive power of our own thoughts, arising from a lack of strong convictions and ideas of our own which are opposed to those involved in the thought vibrations reaching us from others. 2. General agreement and harmony with the outside thought vibrations, which, operating on the principle of like attracts like, actually attract and draw such thought influences to us, or at least open the gates of our minds to their influx. 3. General belief in, or fear concerning, the power of the outside thought influences to reach us. The confident expectation of earnest belief or of deep fear is practically the same thing, and, in either case, it opens the gates of our minds to the thought influences in question. 2. Neutralization. Thought vibrations are subject to the process of neutralization, by means of which they are deprived of much of their strength and inductive power when they come in contact with thought vibrations of an opposite character, either in the minds of individuals or in the general thought atmosphere of persons and places. Thus, when a current of thought vibrations comes in contact with an individual of strong, positive ideas and convictions of an opposite character, the current is weakened by the contact and conflict, and loses its power to influence either the individual or others. In the same way thought currents are weakened or neutralized by contact with strong, positive thought vibrations of an opposite character in the thought atmosphere of a place. On the other hand, however, if the new thought vibrations be in accord with the original current, the latter receives fresh strength and power. The mental atmosphere of every place of public meeting, and of every place in which numbers of persons live, is constantly filled with thought waves, thought currents, thought streams and thought forms, all made up and composed of the thought vibrations of numerous persons, drawn together by the force of their mutual attraction. These streams of thought vibrations of course are constantly coming in contact with each other. When this happens a certain process is set up in which usually occurs either a combination and blending of the harmonious elements or else a neutralization of the inharmonious elements. In the process of neutralization a certain definite ratio is found to maintain. For instance, if the two opposing forces are of about the same degree of power and energy, each will lose practically an equal amount of inductive strength by reason of the neutralization. But, if they differ in comparative power and energy, they will each lose in the inverse ratio of their relative strength. The stronger will lose less, and the weaker will lose more. Thus if one of the opposing forces is twice the power of the other, it will lose only half as much as does the weaker one. But in each and every case of neutralization there is a loss on both sides. This being so, it follows that the individual coming in conflict with strong opposing thought influences must replenish his own thought power by pouring into it a stream of strong, positive ideas representing his own convictions, principles or beliefs. This process of neutralization is also manifested in the process of treatment of things, places or conditions, on the part of the followers of mental science. Here the adverse, undesirable, negative thought atmospheres are neutralized and dissipated by turning upon them a steady, ever-replenished stream of positive, good thought vibrations. 3. Rhythm. In a preceding section we have spoken of the whirlwinds of thought vibrations, which sometimes pass rapidly over a crowd, a community, or even over a whole country, or, at times, over the entire civilized world. These mental whirlwinds, starting from a focal center, spread rapidly in an ever-widening circumference of its circles, and with ever-increasing force and power, that is, ever-widening and ever-increasing up to a certain point. Sooner or later, however, the influence of the outside thought opposing it, combined with that natural rhythm which is found in all natural activities, serves to slow down the movement, and to dissipate its strength. Everything in nature has its rise and its fall, its increase and its decrease, its birth and its death, and these thought whirlwinds or whirlpools come under the general law. If you will study the history of mental epidemics, crazes or other phases of extended thought contagion, you will perceive the operation of this law of rhythm, this tendency to regain and restore the normal balance between the opposing poles of things. In the instances cited in a preceding chapter, you will note the gradual or rapid decline of the contagion, following its rise to its highest point. You may also see the principle manifested in any case of popular excitement, such as, for instance, a great religious revival, a political campaign, or in any other form of mental excitement in which a large number of persons are affected. From the stages of intense, burning ardor, excitement, or even frenzy, there is a corresponding slowing down and cooling off. The reaction follows the action, and is equal to it though in an opposite direction. Were this principle not in operation, there would be no limit to the spread and increase in force of a mental epidemic, it would veritably consume the world with its intensity. 4. Harmonious attraction. As we have informed you in the preceding sections of this book, there is manifest in the world of thought vibrations a certain strong attraction between thought waves or thought currents, and the minds of those persons whose general thought and feeling are more or less in harmonious agreement with those represented in the thought currents. Like attracts like, birds of a feather flock together, mine own shall come to me, all these statements are illustrated by the actions of the thought currents in response to the drawing power of the mind. Persons of strong convictions, right or wrong, good or bad, are constantly attracting to themselves the thought currents of other persons of similar convictions. Likewise, persons of certain strong emotional states, affections, desires, passions and inclinations, are constantly drawing to themselves the thought currents of other persons of similar natures. We are connected by invisible mental links and filaments with others of similar thoughts and emotional states, similar natures and characters. Our thoughts and their thoughts have an elective affinity for each other, each draws and attracts the thought currents of others of the same general character. We are constantly forming and maintaining mental partnerships in this way. We should be careful what kind of partners we join within this thought relation. If you have been drawing thought currents of an undesirable nature, you should take mental stock of yourself for the purpose of discovering and eradicating those thoughts and other mental states which have proved to be the magnet drawing to you this undesirable crowd of thought influences. You should then replace these objectionable mental states with thoughts and mental states of a desirable character. You may deliberately attract and draw to yourself the most desirable kind of thoughts and mental states. You may have any kind of mental partner that you desire, if you will but establish the first member of the firm in your own mind. 5. Belief or fear. As we have pointed out in other sections of this book, and also in other books of this series, the mental state known as confident expectation exerts a powerful dynamic force in the direction of attracting or drawing to the individual the objects or things which form the subject of his strong faith and hope. This principle is found active in the case before us, i.e., the case of thought-induction. The person who earnestly expects, hopes, and believes that the positive, advantageous thought currents of others will reach and influence him, undoubtedly sets into operation the subtle forces which attract and draw such to him. Likewise, the individual who strongly fears, and therefore expects confidently, that the adverse, negative thoughts of others will reach and affect him, equally draws and attracts to himself that which he so strongly fears. In either case, the principle is that of confident expectation. In each case there is present a strong faith or belief, which in one case is accompanied by hope, and in the other, by dread. In fact, at the last, faith, hope and fear, dread are perceived to be the opposite poles of the one mental state, the mental state of confident expectation. Each pole is possessed of a strong drawing power or attractive force, each draws to itself the objects or conditions corresponding to the thought. This realization of the essential identity of the two apparent opposites will be found to furnish the means of the reconciliation of the two facts, seemingly opposed to each other, which for so long has perplexed and disturbed the students of mental science. The first phase of the power of confident expectation, i.e., that of faith-hope, is illustrated in the many cases of mental healing, or similar forms of mental or spiritual therapeutics, in which sick persons by their earnest faith and hope attract and draw to themselves the healing thought and mental patterns of the healer, or person giving the treatment, which thought influences in turn serve to arouse within the patient his own recuperative force and energy, and thus to bring about a cure. The same principle operates in case of treatments for improved conditions, which result in awakening the attractive mental forces of the individual, himself, thus bringing about the desired improvement according to well-established psychological laws. Thus faith and hope are powerful mental states, capable of affecting important results. The second phase of the power of confident expectation, i.e., that of fear-dread, is illustrated in the many cases of persons affected by their belief in adverse treatments, malicious magnetism, black magic, witchcraft, and so on. The history of psychology and mental science contains numerous instances in which persons have been seriously injured in health, and in some cases have actually died, by reason of their belief in the power of evil inherent in the adverse thoughts of others. Here the fear-dread has acted in the same way as does faith-hope, both being phases of confident expectation, that is to say, it has attracted to the person the evil influences which were dreaded, and the evil effects which were feared. Here, the thing I feared has come upon me. There is nothing strange in the matter, once the principle is understood. No one who is filled with faith, hope in the good, and who banishes fear-hot dread of the evil, need ever suffer from any of the adverse mental influences above mentioned. This is the truth which is destined to set many free from the curse of error. The 5 rules of thought induction which we have just called to your attention will be found present and operative in practically all phenomena of thought power in all of its many phases. You will do well to study each very carefully.